A motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Time for public comment.
Are we gonna
Danya?
keep it to 3 minutes? That's time.
Good evening, Danya Viola, Durham. Going over your February 12th minutes that were recorded, I have some issues here I'd like to address, in as much as budget season is upcoming, and we do have the discussions underway. I just failed to see where, on page 7 of your document, for record, having the energy savings project attributed to the building and ground supplies, and not to actual closing of Corn School, because I thought that's where the largest savings was actually garnered. Further, when did the figure $4.5 million expenditure to keep John Lyman come up for assessment? I didn't, or I don't recall when we've had numbers played out in regard to that, other than upkeep for fuel tank or replacement well and roof and what else there. But I know with the mention of contractual agreements having increased for buildings and grounds and construction, that are we, or should we expect that as a reliable figure, or are you prepared to assess it at less or more? Because if enrollment doesn't justify keeping a school open, I would like to see you have the wherewithal to take a stand and perform for all the citizens and residents of both communities. And if so be it, to close the school makes the most sense and curbs the spending and still allows for proper education of the students, then that's where we should move toward that aim, toward that goal. Also, with test scores being determined every couple years by a certain, or I should say by a different core of academia required by the state, in as much as we had Common Core and previous No Student Left Behind, and prior to that something else, and something else before that when my kids were in. And I understand how you can't really make assessments as to the progress, because you really haven't got the comparisons 2 years and 2 years later for another program. I think that needs to be addressed with the state, and you can get on board.
Time.
Hopefully.
Sorry, 3 minutes, you got 3 minutes.
Okay.
That was 3 minutes.
I'll further close with the remark that I'll speak to you at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Jim?
Jim Irish from Middlefield. I'd like to talk about staffing. That's one of the topics tonight, and make some comments that my colleague Chuck Stengel made last night at the Finance Committee meeting. First of all, though, I'd like to say I'd like to applaud the proposal that the district made for 95% staffing, budgeting and staffing line at 95%. It is in line with historical results, and it will save the taxpayers the typical surplus that is in that line, which ends up being a 2-year float to the school district, so it will save both towns that amount. Secondarily, though, I'd like to talk about the 2 FTE add in staffing that's being proposed. And I'd like to tell you that there's some room for additional reductions, I believe. And these are consistent with one of the goals in the first part of the budget, which says we want to honor the target class sizes. Now, if you've seen the page that talks about target class sizes for each of the schools. There are three situations where an additional teacher can be removed or reduced and still retain the target class size. One is lineman, 1st and 2nd grade. A second staff is lineman, 3rd and 4th grade. And a third opportunity is memorial, 5th grade. In each of those cases, reduction of one staff can still achieve the target class size in terms of student to teacher ratio. That is part of the objectives. So I urge you to challenge the administration to see if something like that could actually be done. It can save us over $100,000 per individual, or $300,000, which is a third of the net increase or in the budget this year. So please consider that.
Any other comments? Not, move on to item 4, approval of the minutes of February 12th. Do I have a motion?
So move.
A second?
Second.
Any comments, questions? All in favor? Next board meeting is...
Abstained.
The next board meeting is March 11th at here. Item number 6 is the plan of regionalization. We've asked Matt Ritter to come tonight. Matt, can you come up here by the microphone and sit with us?
Can I bring a chair?
Yeah, we'll bring it. All right.
This is fine. It's comfortable.
More than these, probably.
Warmed up, I guess. Warmed up? Ready to go, no problem.
Uh, 2 weeks ago, we talked about, the failure of the referendum item A to pass, and we talked about options for moving forward. Kath and I have talked to both first selectmen of both towns, and I think what we wanted to do tonight is talk with Matt about some of the questions that came up last week and other questions that have come up during the week, and then talk about, how we move forward. And so that, with that, we gave Matt a list of the questions, so maybe you might want to start, or we can just start by asking questions.
Whatever you guys prefer. If you guys want to just ask your questions right away, and I don't want to miss any of your points or talk on for minutes and then not answer what you want. So if you want to start with questions, we can do that, or I can go into what I think you want me to answer, so.
Why don't you start with what you think you want to
All right. I'm sure you guys will tell me if I don't answer what you want me to answer. So let's just take one step back, okay? And let me just say that you guys have had as a board, a difficult few months because of the fact that you had been used to doing something a certain way, and then you had a law firm come out and say, we don't think you can do that anymore, right? And that's never easy. And so for Shipman and Goodwin, we became involved after you received an opinion from your bond counsel at the time that the manner in which you had to close schools would have to be by a plan amendment as opposed to a vote of the board. And one thing that we worked with you on was then how to amend that plan so that you could have language before the voters, right? That would be adopted to ultimately allow you to close that school, and then you could issue bonds to do renovations to create a new school. The plan amendment failed, obviously, all right? But one of the first questions I think you guys are wondering was the opinion you received from that law firm previously, was it accurate? Do you need to go to referendum to close the school? When I was here at your last board meeting, right, I was relying on that legal opinion. I had not gone back and double-backed on it. I assumed that was what the board had accepted as accurate, right? I did take the time to review that legal opinion and the plan amendment. We will not charge you for that. I will write off all of my hours on that. It was about 4 or 5 hours, because you're basically getting a second legal opinion, and that's not something that I think is normal, but something that I didn't think you guys had to be charged for, the taxpayers had to be charged for. So, after doing that, here's my advice, or my thought on it. I understand where that law firm was coming from. You guys were relying on previous lawyers and previous boards, the very good catch-all language in your plan amendment on page 14, which said, bottom line was it asked the question, but it also said that nothing in the plan would be binding, right? It was advisory, it was recommendations. And so when you were closing schools decades ago, prior boards and prior council probably said, you know, we have that general language and that general catch-all, and you were not alone. Many regional school districts that were formed in the 1960s and the 70s when the legislature was in pushing for that, right? They were helping to fund it. They were encouraging that. Probably did something similar. Then the Supreme Court case comes out and it changes it. And the court actually overruled a prior ruling on a similar situation, right? So you can't do much except obey the rules of the road, and then if the rules change, you get put in a tough spot. And that happens to not just you, but other school districts. What the Region 12 case talked about was a plan that had listed that there'd be a certain number of schools in each town, right? And then said you could not close those schools, dealt with closures of schools without amending that plan. So what I did is I went back through your plan and I looked at it, right? And what it said is, in the recommendation, is that you'd have an elementary school and a middle school in both towns. Now, some of those things were closed decades ago, right? Under the assumption of the old Supreme Court case law, other advice from legal counsel at the time. So there's some stuff you've already done that was decades ago, and quite frankly, I don't think there's any legal action at this point. I think it is done. I think a judge would say, look, that's gone. That issue's gone. The building is closed. It's been spent. There's not much you can do. You lost your window to challenge that. But you are left with John Lyman School, right? That has not gone away. So my thought is that to close that school, in the spirit of Region 12's case and the new case law, I think it is fair to say that it is safest to go with a plan amendment, like you did the first time. I would also note that you've gone down that path. To simply stop going down that path and saying we're going to go back to the old way would, you'd be subject to litigation probably no matter what you did potentially, right? And we can never control for that. Anybody can sue at any time, guys. I mean, that's just the reality of how it works. But it would have merit, and I think the fact that we've already gone down that path, I think it's best to continue down that road at this point in time, all right? The question that's come from that is, what about the grade reconfiguration? Okay, so now I'm getting into more of the new stuff. I think I've sort of answered that threshold question. You did not get a frivolous opinion by any stretch of the imagination. I understand where it was rooted in, okay? Your original plan was really interesting because although it said you should have elementary and middle schools, right, it doesn't really talk about grades. And here's why. When you actually established the schools, and this is, I'm on pages 7 and 8 of your plan, it was all over the place. Durham didn't have a kindergarten. So think about that for a second. You actually did not have a kindergarten. State law had not required it at the time. The law had been changed that you'd have to have a kindergarten at some point. You had a 1st through 3rd grade, which was Brewster, and a 4th through 6th, which was Corn, was a middle school. And you provided K through 12. Then there was Middlefield, which had a 1 through 2 elementary school, a kindergarten, and a 3 through 5 school, and a 5 through 9. The grades were all over the place. So what they actually wrote in the plan, which I thought was interesting, is we're not making a recommendation on how you reconfigure the middle schools because you guys are all over the place. There's no continuity in ages. So that is actually in your plan. So the plan, the folks who were devising your plan acknowledged, you guys are going to have to figure out how you reconfigure the grades. So I think you are on very strong ground to reconfigure the grades under the rule, though, that you would have 2 elementary schools in both towns unless you amend your plan. But if you were to call elementary school K through 4 or K through 2 or K through 3, I do believe you had that discretion as a board because when you constituted this district, you were all over the place. So it'd be very hard, I think, for a court to blame you guys for trying to put it all together. That's actually what you're charged with, taking these 2 districts and merging them, knowing that they had very different approaches to education, different systems in place. So from the reconfiguration standpoint, I feel pretty good about you guys being able to do that, all right? So then the question is, if you did a resolution to amend your plan, how would it work? I think one of the confusions that I saw, not confusion is the wrong word, but I saw a lot of questions about, do we have to have 1 question, do we have to have 2? It's not my choice, it's yours. It's not a legal question about how many questions you have. It's the board's comfort level. The question you guys decided to draft for the referendum that failed had the referendum simply say, shall the board have the discretion to close schools? You didn't specify 1 school, you just said, can we close schools? And the voters said you cannot. They rejected that amendment. You could do a plan amendment a lot of ways. You could have had a plan amendment that said, shall we close John Lyman School? And draft it in that way, and then it would have been a referendum solely on that school without giving you future authority. Now, the problem with that is it has limitations. Why? If you wanted to close a school in the future, guess what? You have to go back to a plan amendment, whereas if you give the discretion to the board, you've removed it from a plan amendment process in the future. But you guys have to think about, if you want to go down that path, how best to determine what the amendment should say and how you'd approach the voters of the town, because ultimately, they are the ones who have the final say here about whether you're going to close John Lyman School. I don't really see any way around it at this point. So I would say to you, you give us instruction about how you want the plan amendment to read, and we could draft it in a number of ways that would be 1 or 2 questions, but it does not have to be a double process step. Timeline about how quick it would take, it depends. If you're looking for 2 questions, you got to move pretty quickly to get this wrapped up in the next couple of months or even by November. If it's just 1 question, it would be like the same process we went through last time. We'd have to have a public hearing, a district meeting. We'd have to comply with different notice statutes. But realistically, you could do it in probably 2 to 3 months if you knew it, but you have to draft the plan amendment. That's going to be a key consideration here. So that's, I think there's more, right? But in terms of the plan amendment and how you go forward and what the process, I think that's a pretty good summary of kind of where you all are. And let me be quiet and answer questions that are more specific, hopefully.
Can you address because we had talked about whether the vote to amend the plan that would articulate the process by which a school is closed, who can vote, as opposed to a vote in a referendum to close John Lyman School,
Yep.
as 2 distinct things, possibly having 2 different requirements for voting, and if those 2 questions were in the same referendum,
Yep.
that doesn't seem to make sense.
Right.
And so if there were only 1 vote,
Yeah.
what would that vote be? How would it read, and who could vote?
Yep. Thank you for that question. So if there was 1 minor flaw, and it's minor, in the legal opinion that you got previously, it's sort of recommended you do this all in 1 big shot. It was going to be amend the plan and authorize the issuance of bonds to renovate the school to deal with the fact that you're closing John Lyman. The problem with that recommendation is the statutes have different voting requirements. For a bond issuance, which is 10-56 of the Connecticut General Statutes, it says those that are eligible to vote are the same who are eligible to vote in town meetings, right? Town meeting like in Durham or a town meeting in Middlefield. That includes property owners, those who have assessed value over $1,000 in the town. So it's not just electors, right? For a bond issuance and your budget, right? You get property owners can vote. How many folks who don't live in the 2 towns who own property come and vote? Probably not many, quite frankly, but I bet if you asked your town clerks, a couple folks come down and do it. And that is very common throughout the state of Connecticut in statutory towns that have town meetings. For the amendment plan, and this makes sense, the law was written in a way that said it didn't tie into town meetings. It just said electors of the town, right? It's specific to that in the 10-47, because it ties into those who are eligible to vote for referendum pursuant to a statute in Title IX, which is somewhere in the 9-220s, I don't remember the exact site. And so you have different people that would vote. So to the superintendent's question, you couldn't combine a question that said amend the plan and authorize the bond issuance in the same question, because you'd have 2 different people voting. You could do it at the same referendum, but as 2 separate questions. So you'd be allowing the Durham and Middlefield town clerks to have 2 separate questions, and they would say to someone who walked into town hall, you can vote on this, but you can't vote on that. But if you combine them, there's no way to do that. So I would not recommend combining them. If you somehow amended your plan, which I know was one idea at one point, through the process, which is voted on by the electors, right, excluding property owners of Durham and Middlefield, and it said in the plan amendment that by adopting this plan amendment, any closure of future schools would be approved by a referendum vote of the voters of Durham and Middlefield, right? So it's a little, I know it's a little quick. So you amend your plan that just is broad enough to say the future closing of all schools, including John Lyman, would be subject to a referendum. The plan amendment, again, would be voted on by the voters of the 2 towns. Then the question is, who could vote at the referendum to close the school, that second referendum? It's a heck of a question. I think the answer that would be that it would still be the electors and not property owners. But then the question is, do you need to have both towns approve it or not? I think the answer is no. I think if you said in the plan amendment, and the voters from both towns voted for it in the affirmative, right? And you were very clear that the amendment of this plan would authorize a referendum to close the school, and you specified by a majority vote of the two towns, you can do that. Why? The voters got to weigh in on the original plan amendment. They can't have sour grapes because they were asked and they had to approve it. They could vote it down, but you could draft a plan amendment that allowed you to close schools at a referendum with a majority vote, if the voters from both towns approved that plan amendment. Yes.
One of the things that came up in a meeting, yes, with the Finance Committee last night is that they felt that people didn't read the explanatory information that went with the two questions or the one question. And the explanatory note, could that be voted on as a whole, the whole amendment to the report? We wrote a report that listed the history, the reasons and the purpose, and it had two different questions in it. One was the closing, one was saying keeping a school open in each town. Could you draft a vote on that that said, you're voting on the whole plan amendment, all of the text, not just the two questions that were, the two pieces of authority that were specific?
Yeah, you have flexibility in how you draft the plan amendment. The key is, the question has to be specific enough so voters kind of have a sense of what they're doing. Again, the comparison I gave you last meeting, this happens with charter revision. It's really hard. You amend a whole charter and you don't do 1,000 questions. You do your best to narrow it down, and there's sort of catch-all questions. But look, you have to think about how you want to approach it, and but there is flexibility in how you ask the questions, I think is what I want you to know. And the more specificity you put into it, the better direction you'll have about where to go forward. And I think the key, because of what you're going through because of the Region 12 case, as your counsel is, whatever plan amendment we do, if it's not sort of cut and dry, like shall we close John Lyman School, we're going to spend a lot of time making sure it's very specific so there's no more confusion. There's no more questions of interpretation. The voters of Middlefield and Durham will be given a very specific thing about what they're voting for, and if they want to delegate that authority, they will vote to do so. If they don't, they will vote no. But you got to be specific, and there's a way to do it. Now, explanatory text, you're right, nobody reads them. I mean, I don't know what you do about that. Towns have them all the time. They have to be neutral pursuant to state statute, so they tend to get watered down and are little, what's the right word I'm looking for? They don't jump off the page with you, right? It's very statistical, informational type information, which I think for a lot of people is, they're used to getting more opinionated stuff, quite frankly, but you can't by state law. But yes, the way we draft that question is you guys are deciding that. But you're deciding what you're presenting to the voters. They're choosing what they're going to do and what they're going to give you. And if you give too much power, they may say no. They may not care, but it's their call.
So, a few questions on this. So the language that came through for our prior proposed amendment explicitly stated that authorized to determine the programs and facilities, including associated grade level configuration required to best serve the students of the district as established, including the alteration, expansion, or closure of district school buildings. In reading back through this, I kind of wish we had only included language around school closure of buildings, because I think it's difficult now to make the interpretation about what the intent of the public in voting it down was, because they effectively voted down all of those authorities under that particular amendment or proposed amendment.
Yep.
So I'm not really sure that we actually have any authority to do reconfiguration because of the vote down by the towns itself.
Again, and this is, look, I don't agree, right, respectfully. I think you can, and I think that the key question there was the closure of schools, was not reconfiguration. But they got mixed up together, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, just adding more specificity to the question. But if you guys are the board, so what I'm telling you is that everything has a threat of litigation, and you have to determine, you know what, we think we should include it all in the next question, you could do that. But I go back to, we are relying on your 1967 plan, and I just don't see anything in there that limits you on the reconfiguration, subject to the two requirements of having an elementary school and a middle school in both towns. I think they gave you flexibility to determine what those grades are.
The only thing on that, there's explicit language within the regional plan that says that children attending elementary and middle schools remain in their present locations.
Yep.
And I just, from reading in the Supreme Court decision, in addition to this, they said, in addition, it is reasonable to conclude that the plan provided for hometown elementary schools because it was important to the townspeople in the proposed district to keep their elementary children in schools close to home, and therefore that they would have been less likely to approve a regional school plan that called for a consolidated elementary school in the future.
Yeah, that's right.
And so again, it's just, I don't think it's as clear cut about our ability to move out elementary schools out of our towns, is maybe that, because of those particular two stances on that.
There's a little difference, though, in your plan language that I want to point you from that case, because I have that highlighted, I read that verbatim with you, and I said that's going to be an issue. This is the plan. This is your plan from 1967. Because of the difference in the grouping of grades in the two systems, the committee is making no recommendation concerning the grade structure of the middle school under regionalized administration. Such determinations be the function of the regional school boards. In Region 12, it specifically said K through 5. And the difference in that case, too, I go back to it, you guys were all over the place. You didn't even have a kindergarten in Durham. So there's no way a court, I should never say no way, judges will have different interpretations. It's harder for a judge to compare that to Regional 12 because of this specific language here about the middle school being completely delegated to you that was absent from the Regional 12 plan. And the second thing I think that's really critical is you didn't have a uniform plan. If you had K through 4 in both towns and a 5 through 6 in both towns or 5 through 7, then I'd be a little more nervous. But the fact that you were all over the place, I think it was they were saying, we're not gonna be able to figure that out for you guys. But that language does say very clearly, you have to have both, you can read it again, but you had to have an elementary and a middle school remaining in both towns. But critically absent from that is any notion of what grades the elementary and middle schools had to be, because that gets addressed on page 7.
So I also have wondered about that language, that it was specific to the time at 1967 that those children were supposed to remain in their elementary school at that time. That's how I have always interpreted that at the time of the implementation of the plan, it was not the intention for students to move out of their elementary school. I didn't read that as students were never to be moving out, because clearly they did, and they did by
they did.
parent
Yep.
choice, not by board direction.
Yeah, and look, it does say in the recommendations that children attending elementary and middle schools remain in their present locations. Well, it's a big word, attending, right? But going back to the language about keeping schools in both towns, you have it's a little conflicting in here about what they have. But could we make an argument that you could avoid a plan amendment? We could. It's not on its face intellectually stupid to make that argument, but my best advice is you should amend the plan to close the school, particularly because you've gone down that path now. But that word attending is an interesting word, yeah.
I'd just like to follow up
Yeah.
on Kath's question, because I would actually phrase it a little bit different. My understanding of the reading of that is that Dr. Serino's understanding that applied in particular to those living beings in the schools at the time.
Yep.
Apparently, in violation of the agreement, they moved out and went to another school and are now all graduated.
Right.
So, under my understanding, which I understand is Dr. Serino's and probably the rest of the board's,
Yep.
that is moot and no longer applies, cannot apply to the current situation. Is that a fair reading of the text? Do you think?
Where you got your prior legal opinion was not, it didn't talk about the attending
I'm
language.
not worried about that.
Understood, yeah. So let me give you my thought. The question in the referendum, though, is what gives the lawyers pause. So it's page 14 of the plan versus page 3 where the word attending is there. Shall the town of blank join the following blank, right? In the establishment of a regional school district with the schools located in the towns of Durham and Middlefield for the purpose of providing the necessary facilities and administering grades K through 12. So here you have the word attending. And if it had said that in the question, boy, that'd be powerful. But remember, this is what the voters actually saw on the ballot. And so a judge is going to give that great weight. And it just says the schools located, and those schools are enumerated throughout the plan. I think that's the problem. Or at least a problem enough to give you pause.
The question,
Oh, go ahead.
the question I have is that you said elementary and middle school in each town. So if we close John Lyman, our proposal is that we would only have one school in Middlefield, which would be an intermediate school, 3 through 5.
Right.
Which is not an elementary and middle school.
Well, so help me understand, and excuse me for not knowing exactly where all the schools are, right? Can we go through that again, where you are, and where are you today with Durham and Middlefield grade-wise?
7th and 8th grade are all in Durham.
Are all in
And
Durham?
they've been in Durham
For a long time, that's
Yeah.
right. So what I said earlier is
19,
boards made decisions
Right,
prior under different case law and different interpretations.
yes.
Look, it's over. That decision's been made,
I
right?
guess my question
Yeah.
is, if we proceed with our plan.
Yeah.
And we go to referendum and we say, we're gonna, close John Lyman, do you agree with that? And it goes through, maybe. And then we only have 3, 4, 5 grade in Memorial, at Memorial in Middlefield. That is not elementary and middle. Do you know what I mean?
It's
Well,
elementary.
you'd have an elementary, arguably, right?
Yes.
And you'd have a middle school, which is a vestige of a different time. Now, so I think you'd be okay.
Okay.
You could in the text, right, that plan text, which nobody really pays too much attention to, but it's important. You could do some clarifying language. You could
spent
do
a
some.
lot of time on that.
Sorry, Bob. It's just true. People read the question, right? They read the 2 questions. I hate to
Look,
say.
We've been calling it intermediate, just
Yeah.
as a way to describe primary, intermediate.
Sure.
And one of the things that Attorney Ritter had said to us was the way that elementary schools are defined, across the United States, sometimes it's K-6.
Right.
Sometimes it's 3, 4,
Sometimes
K-4,
K8.
K-2.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So I think you'd have flexibility there, but on that point, you could do some sort of validating language in the plan, which is sort of a byproduct of the approval by the voters. That would be something that'd be worth doing to sort of at least clean up for posterity what kind of happened over the last 30 years. It wouldn't be a bad idea.
And
I
they,
did that in that report.
Yes, right.
I mean, I did indicate when all
Yeah.
these schools changed.
Yep.
And it's from 1985 that 7 and 8
Right.
have been, it's what,
the explanatory text, that can't be posted at the voting.
There should have been posters of the explanatory text at the polling places, were there not? No?
I don't know.
The
I just-
clerks under the statute normally post, they
I
post,
just know
I
that
think,
was some
3.
feedback that I had
Interesting.
gotten, was that a lot of people didn't know about the explanatory text. And I
Okay.
don't think really understood,
What was going on?
yes.
Yeah, there should have been, I always,
So I knew it was at the library in both town halls, but
Right.
I don't know how many,
Yeah.
and it was on our website, but how many people actually
yeah,
went to that?
there's supposed to be big posters hung up. Again, it's neutral, so there's no,
Sure.
right, you're not advocating one way or another. I don't know if those were there, but if you do it again, the town clerks in both towns should make sure those are put there.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Jamie, you mentioned-
And just going back to the early days and days gone by, the boards had a lot of flexibility, particularly in utilization. They didn't call it that then, but, I'm just gonna go back to my experience. Kindergarten, what used to be John Lyman Chestnut Hill School. First grade, Center School, was not a community school. Second grade, back to Chestnut Hill, AKA John Lyman. So there was a lot of wiggle room, I think, but does that give us any historical perspective to say this is what went on also back in those days? And not to mention the fact that Middlefield kids have been going to Durham schools for awful long time now.
It would certainly go to the weight of the evidence in any court case if you got there. The question for the board is, if you were to close the school now without going to the referendum in the 2 towns after you did it, does that make you more subject to litigation or not? And probably might, frankly. I think that's and there's, in the Supreme Court case changed, and things have changed over time, and it's the safest answer I can give you. But is it indefensible? No, it's not. But you'd have to argue on the merits.
I get, so to me, I don't think that there's any way we cannot go back to amend the plan at this point, given the vote. To me, I think the bigger issue is about with the wording in that document, and what the intent is of that amendment. I think that, just as a personal opinion, I think the most clear presentation of language that would be in that would specify explicitly what the intended configuration is moving forward within the school district, because it would clarify and clean up any kind of hanging parts that we had in the past, and it would, I think, set the stage for moving forward.
Yep.
That is in a difference to another proposed amendment, which is just to authorize the board to be able to do those things without explicitly stating what we're doing, and then going back and doing a second vote for another, on a referendum basis. I don't think I think that's disingenuous to what the initial town vote was. I think that the towns wanted the right to be able to say the configuration and the actual buildings or enclosures within the school. And I think a proposed amendment that explicitly stated the configuration and the closure of the school would be, I think, best kind of fit with what the towns initially wanted.
And you could clearly have a question that say, shall the district close John Lyman School to have the following configurations of schools in this? You could do it any way you want. It has to be a yes or no question. That's the only requirement by state statute. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to write it. And look, we do a lot of referendum work. I do most of it for towns, not really, because you guys are special as regional boards, like local boards don't go to referendum, obviously. When you're delegating a lot of authority versus specificity, you do sometimes hear from people that they prefer to see a question that's very specific as opposed to sort of a broad delegation of authority. And you just got to weigh the voters for that. But there's probably some validity to that.
Andrew, as a clarifying question, when you were talking about configuration, you were talking about granting the board the right to determine the configuration, not specifically saying that our plan is to go with this grade configuration in this school and this grade configuration in that school.
No, the actual configuration, to say explicitly within the regional plan amendment that we are moving towards a K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8 configuration. Because I think that it clarifies previous steps that we have taken. I think, to me, it buttresses us against any further litigation that may happen
Okay.
because of previous movements that happened after this court case, in particular in relation to corn. And I think it's the most direct response to the prior vote by the townsfolk with regards to their desires to make decisions with regards to configuration and to buildings.
But then, by doing that, don't we hamstring
Future
the
boards.
the
You
future
do,
boards
you'd have to go back to plan
Yeah,
amendment.
but I don't think that
limit
that's, yeah.
the buildings?
I don't think that that's an unreasonable step. I mean, those are massive changes for towns. I don't think it's unreasonable to go back to a town when you're proposing changing schools or moving schools out of their districts or closing schools within their districts.
So when you say configuration, are you referring to buildings or the placement
No,
of
I'm
grades?
specifically grade
Grade
configuration.
boundaries.
I'm being very explicit
Okay.
about it.
Because you just mentioned moving buildings.
There's
So
there's two components
I
to
would
it.
just comment to that, you know, I looked at my schedule for next year. I have 54 meetings for the board. We all spend an enormous amount of time understanding the issues that are involved in all kinds of things, including reorientation of grade configurations. Everybody in town doesn't have the time to do that. And I will give my answer to Bob's question, which is I think it does hamstring the board in a way which is actually quite important for the board's function. I also favor the idea that building reconfigurations, building closing, maybe building openings, should be approved by voters. That's clear. We have to do that in order, to me, we have to do that in order to keep contact with the people of our towns. But what you're talking about is a level of management which is really highly specialized. That's my, and I don't have the sense
I don't.
that was an issue in the last
I don't
referendum.
necessarily think so, because I'm not actually making a proposal that, these would be fundamental shifts in the town structure and the district structure. So if we went to a different configuration, we all of a sudden said, oh, by the way, we want to have one K through 8 school, we're going to have it in Durham, and that's the way it's going to be. I think that the towns should have the right to say whether or not that's what they want. That's the type of thing. I'm not talking about nitpicking something. These are huge. When we're talking about reconfiguration, these are huge changes that only happen once every 20 or 30 years.
So we just voted to move one grade from one building to another. Should that have been a referendum?
I think if you give them the overall plan, you say this is where we're headed,
Should that have been a referendum? Do we need to not do that until we get the town to vote?
yeah,
on where
I
sixth
do. I
grade
think based on what they just voted on, yes. I think we
we've
hamstrung
already
ourselves
established that-
by what we included in that language. And I think if anybody could say, the towns voted this down. It said specifically in there about granting or not granting you access or the right to be able to change configurations. And you are now changing the configuration and disregarding what the towns just voted on. I'm just saying, I mean, and Matt's definitely right. Anybody can sue or not sue, but I'm just thinking,
About anything.
The
Might-
only thing though,
might
going
I-
off of that is though, like in the example you gave, so if we decide tomorrow we're gonna have one K-8 school and then the high school, that would require schools to close and would require a referendum and for the people to vote. So I think in most situations, probably, if we were to reconfigure grades, it would likely be also a facility issue in terms of probably needing bonding money or closing a school. So like, there is that piece. In the terms of like, just switching like sixth grade, I mean, something simple like that, well, it's not simple, probably wrong word, but you know what I mean? Like, I think in most situations, we would be going to referendum to reconfigure grades.
Okay, yeah,
You know,
can I, just a
Okay.
point of
No, no,
clarification though first. So we put forward a plan amendment to referendum, and it failed.
Yep.
So what that means right now is we're bound by the original plan agreement.
You have to have 2 elementary schools.
We have to have the 2 elementary schools.
Yep.
But it also says we have the right to manage the grade configuration.
I believe that's right, yeah.
So if we have to honor one of those, why don't we have to honor both of those? I mean, no, I guess from a devil's advocate perspective, I don't think we need to put anything specifically in a future amendment to grant us that authority, because we already have that authority.
I agree, and look, I've explained why I think you have to have 2 elementary schools, and I've explained why I don't think that the grade configurations have to go through a plan amendment process, I think you can do it.
Right.
If you had if you had 9 through 10 in Middlefield and called it an elementary school, that's probably a little far out of bounds, but within the confines of elementary school generally, looking at what you had, looking at the definition, I think you guys comply with it now. I do.
so, oh, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, I'm kind of like on the fence. I believe that you need to, in the effort to be as transparent as possible, we're looking to support a K-2, 3-5, okay? I see, and the public sees a 3-5 in Middlefield as a substantial change. You might call it elementary because it has been, it's defined all over the place out there. But the people in the town don't look at it that way. To them, elementary is maybe a K-4, K-5, K-6, but the K-2 part is in there. So if you put, but however, first of all, I think as a voter, I would like to see that in there. As a board member, the specific configurations are important because it says exactly where we're headed. But on the other hand, it does tie the board's hands in the future to be able to tweak that in some way. But I just think that it's a significant enough change from what's happening or what's available now and in Middlefield, that 3-5 is, you need to have the public, you want their trust.
Right.
And you want them to support it. And, you need to know where they are and
The reason
but you
why
gotta
it would not have been an issue is if the
balance.
referendum had passed, you would not have had a requirement to have an elementary school in Middlefield anymore. So it didn't matter what the grade configuration was. It could be 3 through 5, it could be whatever. So remember, you're,
Right.
right, so
Right.
if the referendum had passed, it wouldn't have mattered.
It
You
wouldn't
guys could do
matter.
whatever you want because you didn't have that
Right,
limit,
but
so.
it didn't pass.
It did not.
And-
I hear you, but I guess what I'm saying is
Reasons
it
why.
speaks further to, if you can close John Lyman and there's not a requirement, you have 2 elementary schools at all, you don't have to worry about the grade reconfiguration issue in that context. You don't have to worry about having K through 2 anymore, or what's defined as an elementary school, because the voters would have said, you can close John Lyman. And that would have included Middlefield voters. So the 3 through 5 thing doesn't come into play if you can close the school.
I think one of the differentiations for me in coupling that is that we can't do the grade configuration without bonding. And that, we have to amend the plan in order to move forward with bonding. And doing the grade configuration includes the closure of John Lyman School. So those, and that if we were to move forward with a vote that is articulated as such, what it does is it puts to the voters, I believe, the decisions that the board made, and it couples them, which was, I think, the original advice that we got from Doug was, you have to amend the plan because of the bonding. And so because we aren't going to go to this configuration without the closure of John Lyman School, if there's another reconfiguration at some point, the district is given a ton of money, we have this beautiful opportunity to have a STEAM school built, you're gonna go back to amend the plan. You would go back to amend the plan. If we
Right.
got a ton of money to build this beautiful school at Memorial, and that was a K-5 or whatever, I think the board would end up going back.
And I
You'd certainly go back
think
for
there's
referendum.
nothing wrong with that, and I'm not proposing putting in the configuration and not putting in language to close this John Lyman School.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I
I'm
understand
saying
why you're
both of them
saying it.
together. It needs to be in there.
Well,
And just to point out, just to go back to Lucy's point, just like, we have to, nobody's talking about, we have to remember, this was shot down in a 3 to 4 fashion in Middlefield. We cannot operate under the assumption or that we're somehow, operating in this vacuum. I think we've done that for way too long now. We have to find some way that either Middlefield can have its voice in this process. I think they did already have their voice. And then we have to give them an ability to vote on what the decisions that we have made up to this point. And I don't think that we've done that. And we've done some surveys. They weren't, professional surveys. We got some idea about the public. But I think, people were surprised by the vote. And I think we've got to have some way of reaching out, appeasing voters, grabbing back their trust. And to me, this is the step, is to say, great, you voted that way, we are now going to give you everything, you make the decisions, and then we'll figure out where we need to go from there.
I just want to clarify. If we decided to go with a referendum question that specifically just says to close John Lyman School, what that then means is not just closing John Lyman School, but that Memorial can be whatever grade configuration the board decides. So it could be a 3-5, and it could still be defined as an elementary school. So it's not just we're closing a building, that 3-5 configuration is also still out there. If even, let's say we don't mention it at all in the referendum, it just, do you vote to close John Lyman? But that also means that if the vote is yes, that Memorial can then become a 3-5.
Okay.
Or
I'm-
a 2-5, or
Yeah.
whatever.
So sorry, Memorial is in the town of
Middlefield.
Middlefield.
Middlefield,
Okay.
yes, that would be the remaining
And,
school.
I mean, if you amend your plan to close John Lyman, your plan is then, you would basically have gotten rid of the notion that you had to have elementary schools in both towns, right? So you'd be left with the language about having 2 middle schools in the town, but that was dealt with decades ago, and you guys sort of made your changes. At that point, I think it'd be fair to say that you'd have a lot of flexibility about what you did and where the grades went at that point. Because what sort of hamstrings you on the grade reconfiguration is that you have to have 2 elementary schools, 1 in each town. If you get rid of that, and the voters, not you, it would be the voters, and I should be very clear about that, it's not you guys decide that, you're putting it to the voters. I think you could put K through 5 in one town, and I just don't know why you'd be hamstrung anymore about where the grade configuration went.
I'm a little confused because you said, first you had said that if you close Lyman, then that means you could go ahead and put whatever grades into Memorial. But this time you said it means that you were also, it's not just closing the building, but we're taking away that requirement that we have to have an elementary school in both towns.
That's a,
He
That's a
said
whole
he said,
different,
he said 2 elementary schools in
two,
each town.
an elementary school in each town.
you know, that's a really good question right now.
That's a big,
Well,
you
if,
know, we're close, just,
so you're, yeah, I mean, that's a really good point about if you were to close John Lyman, right? You guys are saying we're not, I get it. So you're saying that when we close John Lyman, we're not getting rid of a plan that requires an elementary school in both towns, right? We're just closing that particular school, and we
well, that's what I was
closed the
thinking.
building, and we've moved other
We're just
grades
closing
there.
the building.
Well, that-
Yeah, so if that's the case,
Unless
then
you specifically say it.
I get what you're saying now.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's-
That was where I was coming from,
Yeah.
when I asked my question.
I got it.
But
Okay.
that's what the report said, is that we were gonna keep a school in each town.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
that didn't get voted on
Right.
because it only voted on the
But,
first part of
but
that
I'm still gonna
question.
get back to, okay, so
Right.
let's put that to rest, that it doesn't take away the requirement of an elementary school, however. it's
Depends how you
defined.
draft it, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it still gives me pause that people have to understand that if they close Lyman, then Memorial in Middlefield can be whatever elementary grade configuration that the board decides. And if that's an issue with the
Yeah.
voters, then they need to understand that.
Mhm.
Because all it says on the question is, do you approve of closing John Lyman School?
And that's why I just think
And
we need
that's
to
why,
be
that
explicit with the
concerns me,
process.
because
It's misleading
Public isn't
to
gonna know.
do it otherwise and to say,
there's gotta be
Put
a
it out
way
there.
to
There's-
get that message out.
There's several ways to
Gotta
do
be
that.
right.
And one of the things that we talked about is to back to have a really open public session with a lot of history of what's gone on since 1967. Show the configurations that have occurred over time. I produced a little timeline sheet that I'll make a copy of. Can we still make a copy of? And showing all the changes we made, and go back out at the end of March with, a lot of information. I think in the amendment report, we could go over that in detail before we had any referendum say on it, so that people could see the entire report of how we've changed schools over time, and have that as the basis for that, and show, and get back and in the meantime, solicit some information on why people didn't vote for that or why they did vote for it. And get that back into, in more of a conversation. I don't think we're ready to go with changes too quick. I think we would get rejected just because, you didn't listen. Let's go back and talk about this in detail and how we're gonna move it forward.
Those two pieces are critical. Explaining in detail what's going on and what it means so that people understand it and very clearly, and getting a decent amount of feedback from the community to find out what they're thinking as well, because it's really futile to turn around and say, well, just explain it and then put out a referendum, because it may not pass, and we're just kind of getting stuck in a hole and not getting anywhere.
Right.
I think
We
it's
want to move
important,
things forward, so, yeah, those two pieces are critical.
I think it's important to note that all the flexibility that was lent in years past about grade configuration, where students are going, moving back and forth, there was an awful lot of this. All that happened during an era of increasing enrollment, rapidly increasing enrollment. If you look at the building patterns in Middlefield and Durham during the 60s and 70s, not to harp on the past.
And that's in
but-
your plan, by the way.
But
Yeah.
now we're in an era of really serious declining enrollment. That has to be somehow conveyed,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah, your plan talks
that's
about an
part of the
explosion of
explanation,
population in the
the
towns,
reason.
actually, right? So, I mean, look, this is complex stuff. I admit that. There's a lot of ways you could do it. I think what the board has to do is give direction about if you want to go back to referendum with a plan amendment, just what you'd like the question to say, because the plan text amendment, right, that Bob spent a lot of time on and we reviewed and looked at, is still part of this. You can't forget that, right? The question is not everything. there's a subsequent amendment to the plan that's involved. The question is conveying to the voters a summary of it. But there are other plans, and one of them was you're gonna have a school in both towns, right? So whether that was acknowledged or not, but the more you can put in the question, the better, because that's what voters are gonna see the most is the question. But you just have to determine what that comfort level is. I would say that one of the questions you guys asked is, and this might be going to the point you were saying, is you now have a school that is open. You have a budget you're putting together for FY 2021. That's part of your budget, right? And so when you talk about timing and everything, you can't lose sight of the fact that you have a budget that you're dealing with. I'm sure that's what the folks to the left are waiting for. But you have to operate that school. It's still open. I think you can move grades around. I do, but I think you still have to operate that school.
Well, that brings up one of the questions I have.
Yep.
Regarding when we go to referendum with a bond question.
Okay.
We basically, right now, as it sits, we don't have authorization to close the school.
Correct.
And I believe we, as a board, have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that that school is functional. And I think we have an operational imperative to make sure it's functional, that it doesn't shut down in the middle of the winter. Therefore, we need in this next budget to have the $4.5 million, which, by the way, I think only gets us through 5 years. And at this point, I think we should be planning in perpetuity because we don't have authorization to close it. So we should be asking the voters to authorize either $4.5 million or more to continue the operation of John Lyman School with the associated $8 million per year operating cost or whatever it is, or we fund $2.6 million or whatever it is in order to outfit the other schools to accommodate the closing. Because it really comes down to a decision between those 2 points. And
So-
we need to get that conveyed very accurately.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was asking in one of my questions, I wasn't aware it has to be a yes or a no, but can it be an A or a B? Because you can't choose no to both. And you can't choose yes to both.
You could choose,
Well,
why can't you choose no to
Yeah,
both?
so I did look at this.
Because we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure John Lyman School will open next September and continue to run for the next 20 years, because we have no authorization to close it. And that costs $4.5 million. So you can't say no to that.
I think we're making this way too complicated. I think we're trying to go around in way too many ways. I don't understand why the board is scared just to put it out there in the configuration and the closure of the school and put it up for a vote. It is the simplest plan,
Well,
and all of these other things are extremely complicated. They're slightly misleading. I would challenge you. We've made this decision. Let's put it out to the voters and let them vote on it.
Just on that point, you could go to referendum for $4.5 million appropriation and bond authorization to renovate the school, the John Lyman School. You can do that. The referendum, the second question, right, referendum that said, or give us 2.6 million so that we can close it, would be an end around of the plan amendment process for one, and that was actually the Region 12 case they talked about it. A bond authorization and appropriation, remember what I said about who can vote and the approval process. Under 10-56, we include property voters, property owners, and it's only a majority. Under that plan, you'd be closing the school by only a majority vote, not both towns. I think that would be the problem with it. But the bond authorization and appropriation to fix something, you guys can do anytime you want, yeah. Now, the problem with two questions, and we get asked this a lot, and this get asked in charter revision, like polar opposite questions. I know this sounds crazy. Sometimes they both pass, and sometimes they both fail. Nothing precludes voters from voting yes and no on both, and that happened about 20 years ago in a small town charter, and they tried to offer a town manager from a government of mayor, and they both passed. So they had to do it all over again. So believe it or not, that those voters can be funny like that, yeah.
That's why I was asking if it could be an A or a B.
Yeah, we would tell you no. You get to ask the question yes or no, but it's a good question. I mean, in some cases, you wish the law would be changed maybe to allow that, because it's a fair point, right? Make voters pick, but they can pick both theoretically.
On the flip side, I feel like maybe I'm oversimplifying this in my head, but like, can't we just go to referendum with one question that basically, for the amendment that basically says, in order to close the school, it, has to pass by referendum? Like, that's just the question. And then, a couple months later, Then we go to referendum that says, do you authorize to close John Lyman? And then question 2, do you authorize the bond? Like,
Right.
why not do it 2 separate ones? I know that
Could do that.
prolongs things, but like, I kind of feel like that's
So
very
that's what
simple and
that is what I've been
clear.
pushing against, because it is not respectful of the independent town vote in the process of what they said coming out of this prior vote, which is they want to have the ability to close the schools. I just think that to go in and say, we're gonna kind of slip this by, we're gonna put it in so that we can close the schools within the amendment, and then we're just gonna go by majority vote across the 2 towns for everything afterwards, it effectively,
I see.
Middlefield is giving away their authority to make decisions with regards to schools within their district.
I see your
Part of
point on that,
but
but
part
then
of regionalization is that. I mean.
Well, that's what it was, but it's
I
not
mean,
now.
Part of regionalization is that, you know, the district as a whole ends up owning these schools. The district as a whole ends up the management of the schools. The district as a whole ends up in the responsibility to do that. And both towns contribute to that activity on a proportional share. So, you know, I think if the amendment was written showing the configurations that we are proposing and dealing with the final issue of, you know, the authority to close a school, then you could cover both things. People would understand where we're going. They would see the authority to close a school, and then we would have a referendum on, after that, if that's approved, then we would have a referendum on the actual closure of school. That, people need to know what the impact
Right.
is of closure of a school.
Right.
And that has not been, although we've talked about it for 4 years, it's not really available to the general public. They have not, you know, a lot of people at Lyman have paid attention to it, but the rest of the community has not. And we need to have a process by which the community can understand where we are, how we got here. When we went to the grade configurations, it was a series of teachers and students that spent a year looking at options, looking at why we should go this way and how it would work. And we got a lot of input from the community, but it was a select group of community of teachers and students and some parents. Missy and others have worked on that for several years. And I think we need to get that back out. I don't think the board is ready to act. I think we need to bring all of the information back out to the public, showing the costs and benefits, showing the problems that we have, showing the impact of fixing the school or not fixing the school, and then go to do with a plan amendment. Because going out right now, we have not changed anything. We've just said, vote again. And I think that's all people would understand. We already voted no, why are we voting again, no again? So let's not do that. Let's spend the month and prepare enough information so the public can get a sense of why 10 of us got to this point to begin with. And we spent, as Victor says, an awful lot of time and years. The utilization committee's been working on this for 6 years to handle the impact. So my sense is that, yes, we move ahead with the plan amendment, but we do it without a lot more public input and explanation of where we are and how we got here, and then a very specific amendment that they can understand.
I
I
guess-
totally agree with you. Excuse me, I totally agree with you, that's what we need to do. I think a vote now, a referendum now is too premature. We're just recreating the same thing we just had. I don't think we need to put $4 million in the budget, because I don't believe that whole $4 million is needed instantly. I think there's priority things, and I believe something was put in anyway to take care of some of the priority issues. It's not, we have to spend the whole $4 million to keep the school going. Definitely, communication, we've got to get out there. We have got to really do a yeoman's job of getting out to the public and getting as much information out there as possible, getting input from the public as much as possible, and then making our decision as to what the questions are going to be that are on the referendum. I don't think we're ready to do that at this point. That's my feeling. I agree with you, Bob.
Do you think we need to survey the community to get feedback?
I just think, I mean, the problem with the survey is that I mean, unless we're gonna do an extremely rigorous survey where we're reaching out and we're getting great sampling, we feel like we have the full representation of what will be at the voting booth on a particular day, I just don't think it's worthwhile. We've gotten mixed messages on our informal surveys in the past. And I guess ultimately, I just don't know how informative the public is going to be on the specific question about the language that we include within the amendment proposal.
That's our job to do that.
Right, it's
That's
our
right.
job to do that. So I
That's
don't, so, I mean, I definitely think informational sessions are wonderful, but I think that we need to come prepared to the informational session with the language that is intended to be in the
Yes,
referendum
I
to
agree.
explain it. So then that gets us back to, when are we prepared to make a decision about what that language is going to be in the thing? Or are we gonna have two meetings? One informational session to collect information from the public, then decide on language, and then a second informational meeting to go over what the proposed amendment are. I think we have to
Perhaps,
consider that.
Yeah, perhaps.
If we were able to do a survey, a simple survey where we got the feedback that the board feels that they need in order to inform them about the creation of a question that will pass to support the decisions the board has made, what do you want to know? What would help the board to craft a new question? Or to really get a pulse on what the people of the communities, like why they voted the way they did?
Yeah. How they feel about closing the school, that would be the first thing. The second thing would be, what are their thoughts on the grade configurations? And I'm not sure, what else? Those are the two main things. Because we don't know. We don't know if they voted no because they didn't want to close the school or because they didn't like the grade
And
configurations.
the other
And it
would
was
be
okay to close the
the
school.
explicit authority
I
of
think we
giving
know
the.
why.
I
I'm
think-
with you, Bob.
Lucy,
Yeah.
everything I read on social media,
Yeah,
which,
let's just read
by the
social
way,
Nobody.
we all
Right,
talk about
information.
how we don't like fake news, but I'll tell you, fake news is alive and well in Regional School District 13. When I looked at the social media, I was reading stuff that said this board is not transparent. You all know what we've done to include people on every one of our committees that aren't board members. We're the only district in the state that does that. We allow people to come in, we allow people to talk, we listen to all of the public comments. So they had that as fake news.
Okay.
The other fake news that I'm sure you all heard was that our school district doesn't have a single school in the top 50. Yet we've got two elementary schools that are schools of distinction in the state of Connecticut. You don't get that way by being in the bottom 50 in the state. That was all over social media. So, and then I keep hearing time and again, if we close the school in our town, the property values are gonna drop.
Right.
I have never once seen a survey or study anywhere that says that. So if we made the statement that we're gonna keep the school open and we're gonna build a brand-new school, and it's gonna increase your property values, we would need to provide 10 studies proving why that was the case. Yet those statements keep getting made with no proof behind them. And as for our property values have barely recovered from the recession 10 years ago. They still haven't gotten to where they were 10 years ago. And that has nothing to do with us closing a school, because we haven't closed the school in the last 10 years. So the reason people don't want the school to close, and it's all over social media, is Middlefield won't have an elementary school, which is another fallacy. Middlefield has an elementary school, independent day school, that's been operating forever. And that's a private school, but all I'm saying is the reason people don't want to close it is they don't want to close the elementary school in the town of Middlefield. And that is, and it doesn't matter the grade, they want the K through 5 in Middlefield, and that's great if that's how they feel, and that's what we need to do, then that's what we need to do. But all I'm saying is I don't think another survey is gonna tell us anything different than that. And I'm not sure, and I believe we do need to do a better job of educating and getting the information out there. But I don't think it's gonna change people's minds, because at this point, this is not, many people, this is an emotional decision. This is not a fact-based decision. So there will be people who want to make a fact-based decision, but there's a lot of people that it's an emotional decision. And no amount of facts are going to change that. It just won't. But anyways, that's for
Thank
what
you,
it's
Bob.
worth. And I was, not
we had-
going to say that. But the other thing, I do have one last comment. All of the discussions, because I did listen into the last meeting, I wasn't in attendance. All of the discussions and public comment dealt with the budget issues, the closing of the school, the decrease in the values of the property values in Middlefield. What I never heard being brought forefront, which is the primary reason we're doing this, is to improve the educational opportunities of our students. That is the primary driver for everything we've been discussing here tonight. And yet it always seems to be the last thing mentioned, or it's on the back burner. It is the primary thing. And having our grades, what do we have per grade level? 120 students in each grade level? So that's 4 classrooms, 5 classrooms, and splitting those into 2 separate buildings and expecting that the educational quality is the same for the students as they go up through in terms of professional development for our teachers and our staff. If you have half of the grades split, it just does not make any sense from any operational standpoint. And that's what this issue is about. And I don't know how we can bring that to the forefront.
I think you can bring it forward by having you say that at
Yeah,
a
you're just
meeting. And having others say it, and not just us.
Yeah, no, but and then have people listen, but, anyways, I'm
We
sorry,
had- Thank you, Bob. We had one more question.
Thank you. Thank you
one
for
more-
allowing me to vent.
We had one more question that Andrew asked about the minority rule on the electors.
Yeah, so I think the question was, could the Durham Town Charter be amended to provide for compliance with 9-167A, which is the minority representation statute? I think that'd be okay. I'm not their town attorney, so it's not really my opinion that would matter. Bless you. There's a carve-out from the minority party requirements in 10-45 in your regional school district statutes. You guys do not have to comply with 9-167A. The reason is, it'd be really complicated with 2 towns, so they just said, don't worry about it. Could you do it locally in your own town charter? I suppose you could figure out a way. How many board members does Durham have now? 6. So I think the statute says you could have no more than 4 from one party. If that's what the voters of the town of Durham wanted to put in their charter, I suppose you could do it, but that's an opinion for the town attorney. I ain't gonna weigh into their stuff. It's complicated enough up here, so someone can answer that for them locally, but I suppose you could do it.
We did also ask the town attorney for a decision on the transition from current vote members to their
Yes.
new terms.
I heard that was, had some questions, and again, it's all him or her to decide that for the town of Durham. So I gave the
So-
best thought I had for them.
And we did ask for selectmen make that decision sooner, so that we know what we have to do.
Are we requesting formally to the first selectman that their town attorney?
Well, she said she was doing that, but I could send a letter and ask formally. I think that would be better to make sure we had a formal letter asking for the decision. Okay,
All good?
yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. I know you got a long night ahead of you, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming down.
Thanks, guys.
Next item is budget.
Do you want to take a little recess?
Yeah, we could take a 5-minute recess for
uniforms.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Costumes and-
Oh, the other thing,
Yeah.
costumes doesn't say an inordinate amount of time.
It happens when you keep me cooped up in my house for over a
It'd be a
week.
shame to have them just disappear.
I lost
so
it.
people
Said
could
what you,
use them.
no, you said what you gotta say, but then we also
Have
have to
a,
go from there and say, okay,
play
but
prop
this is what that
and,
means, and this is where we wanna go.
Something exchange program.
How do we make it
Oh,
work?
you're doing like
How do we make it work?
So
What do you got?
I heard this year that like
We have
every
to
high
keep
school is doing
going.
Mamma Mia
I would
for some
advocate
reason.
going.
Oh, it's a big thing,
K2,
yeah.
3, 4, 5,
We're doing
6,
it
7,
Did-
8 in high school.
Every,
we'd like to
it
get
this year
started.
Because we need the grades.
Before
on the
we
one.
start on the budget,
You'll have to explain to me.
I got the consensus that we will produce some more information. Kath can run a survey. I'd like to give, we tentatively, we're gonna have a community conversation on the curriculum and other things that Kath was gonna do on March 30th. We could combine the two efforts into the same program night and spend a great deal of time and link the issues of education and buildings, and try to get them together in the same night.
That's a community conversation,
Yes.
not a board meeting.
Yes.
So everybody can talk.
Right. And so that'll be, and if that's okay with everybody, I need some help on working the languages and drafting this stuff. I did put together a time chart of changes in configuration that Kat's gonna send out to you. Needs a little bit of editing, but there's a time chart showing what grades were at each school over the last 52 years. So, it's pretty interesting, and, you can see how we've made changes, constantly. So anyway, we'll do that, and I will write to the town and get a decision on the Durham, members' appointments in terms of office.
Barbara, you said March 30th? That's a
Yes.
Monday.
Yes.
Okay.
That was what we had talked about. It could be changes, but that's what we had talked about.
Yeah, I'm not sure where.
Just a date, yeah. But it gives us a month
Gives
to,
us a couple more board meetings and some time if the board decides they want to do a survey, and maybe to get some sort of an FAQ out to people in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Gives people time to get it on their calendar.
I think that's a good idea, an FAQ.
I do like the idea of an FAQ. I think
I
that
like
could be
that
a little
idea.
bit more valuable than a survey.
I think we need a few other people on the board working on that. That could be helpful to have
I hear Bob
the
wants to be on.
perspectives of
Bob
other
said he'd be.
people.
How much?
I had to.
Whatever
Too
it
soon,
takes.
too soon?
Whatever
I
help,
heard you, Bob.
whatever you need, whatever help I can give, I'd be happy.
all right.
I mean, I think we definitely have heard loud and clear about the importance of the clarity of the message.
You all set?
Sure, yep. Tonight, just as our budget overview, we were planned to go over staffing and professional development, programming, and purchase services. Just a quick overview. I think just about everybody who's in the audience was here at our last budget presentation. You can forward that, Ken. It's in salaries, just a quick reminder that we have funded the salary line at 95% of the projected salaries. And had we funded it at 100%, it would be over $1 million increase rather than the $87,000. Question raised tonight about looking at class sizes. We always look at class size and teacher assignment, and if that were a recommendation that we thought was best for students, we certainly would have put that forward already, and it is not a change that I would recommend to the board. And in particular at John Lyman School, in a 1, 2, 3, 4 school where the school's philosophy is based on a multi-age and having 2 years with the same teacher, it would not be my recommendation that we make that change, nor would I recommend that we make the change in the 5th grade at Memorial School based on what we believe is best for students and knowing the particular students. So just, again, we went over this at the original budget meeting. You'll see the, in administration, the reduction of a 0.5 as we will move from, and I'll talk about this in greater detail, of the elimination of, or the change of the Director of Organizational Development position for an HR specialist position, so a 10.5 to a 10.0. And then in our certified staff, you'll see a change from 188.4 current staff members in the certified area to 188.9. And you'll see the total 3-year change, a change from 7.3 to 5.3, certified grant-funded positions staying the same, 1.7 to 1.7, and a support staff change with ABA therapists, transition coordinators, special ed assistants, and central office. You see no change projected for next year. As we go to the proposed staffing changes, I'll just remind you of the reductions, and the reductions are driven by changes in enrollment and then the changes that we're making programmatically in the Director of Organizational Development position. Our additions, grade 2 at Brewster, which is driven purely by enrollment, the coordinator of student affairs at Strong, enrichment teacher based at Strong, alternative education teacher based at Coggins-Chog, literacy specialist, BCBA, the IT position, which actually should say, I believe, systems technician, and the HR specialist. And Kim, if you click on the hyperlink, we can just go through those in a little bit greater detail in terms of the positions that are proposed. This is a chart that we have, that the board has seen before, where we have just by school have gone over just the allocation of staff members across the various areas: student support, special ed, classroom instruction, instructional support, specialized instruction, and other. And at John Lyman School going into next year, we have no projected changes there.
If we have questions you want us to ask you or no?
Do you mind if I go through?
No, that's fine.
Okay, and then at Brewster School, again, just the addition of a grade 2 teacher based on the enrollment of first grade going into second. Actually, that should say Middlefield Memorial School, which is the real name of the school. We have no projected changes for next year in terms of additions. At Strong School, the 2 changes are, first, the coordinator of student affairs, and if you click on that hyperlink, that should give you a little bit more information there.
Bureaucracy.
I love Google Docs.
Do you need to give permission to that, from that? Sorry. do, Kim, is just share with you
I think this is actually a moment to reflect on the place, the importance technology has placed itself in our system. When you realize that not only can the administrators not quite get their stuff done if the stuff isn't set up right, our students actually can't study,
I just shared
the state can't test us, all kinds of things
You were
can't
just
happen.
able to open it?
Yes, but you just shared it with me.
I'm just explaining why it is that we put money for technology into the budget.
Thanks for the infomercial.
It's an infomercial,
Maybe you
yes.
can just a little bit, makes it a little bigger.
What happens when the internet goes down?
For each of the proposed positions, I just structured a little bit of a review. The coordinator of student affairs, which would be located at Strong. Generally, what we do is we kind of put a placeholder in the budget, and all of these will be online. If you don't want to take pictures of it, they'll all be online tomorrow for you. Basically, we've asked for, this is a teacher position with the 092, which is the administrator's certification, preferred but not required. So we have a placeholder in the budget of somebody who would be at a salary step of, highest salary step 14 with their 6th year. So that's a $93,000 placeholder. The $16,422 is an insurance placeholder, which is what the cost of a 2-person insurance plan would be. Basically, what we're looking for in this role is we have 6th grade join the middle school, and we're really looking at not only having that position for the transition, while certainly it would be helpful for that, as we're looking at what our needs are in our middle schoolers in terms of their social emotional learning needs, as well as our desire to really stay focused on our academic agenda. We feel like the type of support at the leadership level would be benefited by having an additional person there. We don't really feel that it has to be an administrator. We're not looking to increase the administrator's bargaining unit in order to address this area. And the inclusion of this position, I believe, will help our school principal be more directly focused on our instructional leadership, as well as the overall social, emotional, and academic well-being. In this position, we'd like this person to have the oversight of, with some of the teacher leaders there, that restorative practice development and implementation, overall student conduct, school and classroom climate and management, as well as overall school climate. Just to address some of the areas that are really unique to middle school and middle schoolers. We have gotten some survey recently from our Youth Services Bureau, who does a survey, as well as our school, our general school climate survey that has pointed out some areas at the middle school that we believe needs more specific attention. Student assemblies and programming, before and after school programming. Lucy has often brought up this idea to me about really kind of expanding the school day, perhaps having some staff members who could start later in the day and work later in the afternoon to provide support for students who may need it, and gives us the flexibility of expanding our school day for students while still meeting our kind of union obligations in terms of the length of the school day. So that's something we're looking at actually in a number of places this year as we're proposing these. Potentially early start time, as well as later in the afternoon. Support and implementation of the school learning plan, coordination and participation in our student assistance team. The primary impact, the intention of this impact really is for students and for teachers, support of our teachers, support of that transition of the 6th graders as part of a middle school, and then to help keep Strong School as a very responsive, developmentally appropriate place for children to be safe, to be supported, and to be learning at the highest possible levels. And again, as I said, kind of a secondary impact there is the support to the school principal in order to address different areas. The other position that we're talking about, here, let me share that with you, Kim, having at least housed at Strong School to start with is the enrichment teacher. The Corey DiMaggio and a team of teachers, as well as Mr. Ford, have been looking at just our process of identification of students who are gifted and talented, as well as, which is something that we're required to do. We aren't required to provide programming, but we believe that we should be doing that. So our enrichment, the focus on enrichment, the identification of students who are gifted and talented, we now have a process that's in place, a protocol to follow. I believe 53 students who have kind of qualified in the kind of our first two assessment areas prior to giving the OLSAT test. So we'd like to see an enrichment teacher who can work directly with students who are identified as gifted and talented, work with smaller groups of students as well, some who may not have been formally identified, but who are showing, kind of showing extended learning abilities. You could scroll up a little bit here. We'd also, as we look at the enrichment and enrichment learning, and we're kind of coupling this with where we're moving to and our portrait of the citizen and the expansion of our hot practices, that we believe that the part of the responsibility of this particular teacher can be to work with teams of teachers using, as some of you are aware of, that artist in residence type of model, where it's kind of unit-based and it provides teachers an opportunity to collaborate, get some feedback, learn some new approaches, and implement that in classroom-wide, so that we have a primary focus on identified students, a secondary focus of small groups of students, and then large groups, both by a co-teaching and by the influence and support of the classroom teacher. And I think, Kim, we can go back out to the staffing chart, where we will move to the high school. And the positions that we've talked about that will be located, kind of situated at the high school, are actually, we've kind of organized them under the Special Services Office. So I think if you keep scrolling down, you'll see that. So the first is the literacy specialist, which is a district-wide position that you have permission. Because of, and this is something that we've been talking with the board about, I think the dyslexia expectations that have been in place for some time really increases the school's responsibility in terms of meeting regulatory guidelines for students who have significant reading disabilities as well as dyslexia. And oftentimes what happens in districts is that they have to go outside of the district in order to have evaluations done, do reports, and make recommendations to the PPT and the creation of an IEP. And in this case, we would have somebody in-house who would be able to do that and meet those responsibilities. You can scroll up a little bit there. because we actually have somebody who is currently a member of our staff who has very specialized training in a particular reading approach, that's a research-proven approach for working with students with significant reading disabilities and dyslexia. One of the greatest benefits that we've realized this year is that this staff member has been able to do training in-house for other staff members, both in the area of the reading department as well as special education. So when we talk about, and it's an expression Corey uses a lot, building capacity, we are really significantly building capacity. However, it's a person who's straddling the role of being a special education teacher as well as doing this type of training and support for teachers, as well as direct consultation and training.
That's the Orton Gillingham program?
That is Orton Gillingham, yeah. The other important feature of many of the positions that we're proposing going into next year gives this kind of family support. And it's something that we've thought about differently as an administrative team, the link to families. And when you're working with specialized populations, students who are gifted and talented, students who have significant reading disabilities, students who have challenges with social, emotional, behavioral, and learning difficulties. Critically important for us to be partnering with families, and very important that there is a cohesiveness in terms of how we're working with students in school and how parents are working with and supporting their children at home. So having this as a part of the responsibility of several of the positions has added just a kind of a different paradigm of thought for us. And having this person be able to attend SEPTO meetings, do presentations, as well as work with small groups of parents and individual parents. And we think a secondary outcome will be shrinking the gap in our ELA performance. We just happen to be going over our very, very impressive performance last night in student achievement in terms of our next generation accountability index. And one of, some of the gaps we're seeing, partly because we have really high performing students, and we have some students for whom learning is really difficult. So when you have that, you're gonna see a greater gap, and in some cases greater than we're seeing at the state level on average. The next position that is in the lineup, I believe, is the alternative education position, which is the BCBA. Please hold. So I'll share the alternative out with you first. Here we go. Victor, thank you for the little infomercial about the importance of supporting technology.
She's on BCBA.
Yep. A board-certified behavioral analyst is a position that has a very specified training and certification. And in our case, in district, I think we have budgeted about $37,000 a year for outside, and I could have just made that up. So we'll do a fact checker on that. It's way higher. Okay, we'll do a fact check on that. You do a podcast. But with the BCBA for students, many students with autism or other pretty significant social, emotional, behavioral issues, we're looking, when we go to a BCBA for an evaluation, it often is outside of the district because we just don't have the specialization in the district. However, we're seeing kind of an increase in the intensity and an increase in the number of students for whom a BCBA consult is really important to us and helps us to really support students to learn at their highest possible level. Having a BCBA in-house would be a district-wide benefit for us, and it will also really decrease the cost that we use in purchase services to have outside evaluations.
And I just wanted to add on to that, that the amount that we would have budgeted this year for BCBA outside purchase services would have been $157,000.
You got 7, right?
Okay, and then finally, the alternative ed position.
No,
Did Sharon?
No, don't worry about it. It seems to be doing this. Second time is the charm.
Okay. All that plan referendum talk just really helped calm us down, Kim.
Rest assured that the information on our system is extremely private.
Just shared it again.
I'm going to spin school.
What do they call that in theory, breaking the wall?
Hold on, let me try
Is that
again.
called breaking the wall in theater?
Hang on.
I think so.
Try it. I asked our new director, Jen Keene, just to kind of do a little bit of an analysis. We had some conversation last night about this at the Finance Committee. And just, we had begun the year with 10 students who were outplaced. Currently, we have 8. And just what I asked Jen to do is just to kind of give me an average of what is the cost, what's the annual cost for a student who's placed outside of the district to be educated. And the average cost for our students is $125,000 a year, with transportation costs at about $41,000 per year. So, when we have these kinds of conversations, we're often, people will say to us, it's not all about the money, and it certainly is not all about the money. It's about the students. But, you can't be a responsible leader without mutually considering both. When we can have our students in their home schools, that's most important to us. We are looking at transitioning a few students back into the district, having a program that's housed in the high school. And the type of thinking and planning that has gone into the design of this program is nothing short, I believe, of truly innovative. When we look at the type of services that a student would need to maximize their learning and growth and development, considering the type of potential challenges they may have, we've really designed our paradigm of thought and our design is really kind of a wraparound and comprehensive service. If you scroll up, I can kind of review for you. You can go up a little bit higher. There you go. That as Jen and I were talking about this, and we were thinking about students, and we kind of looked at it kind of from a matrix point of view, that what type of academic and cognitive support might a student need? What kind of behavior intervention, if any? What might that look like? Counseling, both for the student and for support for the family. life skills, vocational and job coaching. Fortunately, we've begun to develop that programming in district anyway, so it gives us an opportunity to just kind of differentiate that for students who would be in that program. General communication and potentially communication that has to do with articulation, such as in speech, or expressive and receptive language. Obviously, physical well-being is something that can be extraordinarily challenging for students who have very unique needs. More community connections, and then finally, transition services, helping students to become more independent and transition into some independent life. When I think about some of the programming that we're talking about in alternative ed, I think about a comment that Christine made when we first kind of unveiled the portrait of the graduate, and she said, "Is this for all kids? Is this all kids? Are you going to work on behalf of all children, so all children are supported in developing those characteristics and skills?" And yes, that's our commitment. And so that means for some students for whom learning comes very, very easily, and for other students where we're even just kind of socially navigating a school setting can be very difficult, our commitment is to helping all of our students reach that. We're almost there, folks. And I think our systems technician is the title that Ken asked me to use. Maybe just a little smaller. We will have a very comprehensive presentation from IT. That was something that was requested. We used to kind of dedicate an entire night to an IT presentation. And it's always very interesting and informative, and I guarantee it will blow you away in terms of the number of devices that we're using, our attention to cybersecurity, our attention to security in general, our attention to integrated technology for learning. We have just exploded in district. We have a phenomenal department, and when I talk to people about, so what do we need to keep growing? This is the recommendation for a position for next year. There's been a proposal for the past 2 years that has kind of been left on the chopping block, and I believe this is critically important for us as a district. You can see basically what we want is that end user to be able to have the device either for teaching or learning, in order to really add the dimension that we've added to our educational programming. Computers, Chromebooks, tablets, printers, managed print services, projectors, etc. If you scroll down a little further, backup for Board of Ed recording, you probably are looking forward to that. We'd miss you. I think this one proposal, I think for the secondary impact there, really we want this position to really aid teachers and students. One of the very compelling factors in our presenting this has to do with our focus on cybersecurity and just security in general. We'd like the people who are kind of our more advanced, skilled, knowledgeable folks in the department to be able to really be focusing time on our security and cybersecurity. In the presentation, they will address a question that Andrew had, which was, do you have to do everything in-house? Is there anything you can outsource when it comes to cybersecurity? What are the things that you should keep in? What's the cost associated? And how might we deal with that in another way? And finally, just a little bit of a switch in that HR specialist, I think, okay, right there. should have had another recess. Sorry about that. Try again.
HR is protected more.
When IT does their presentation, which I've already seen, it's like phenomenal. And you're gonna see it and you're gonna go, why don't you spend some time with them? I was like, I'm doing hyperlinks. You just have to try to open them 6 times. I probably don't need to go through in great detail what an HR specialist does. We did not have an HR department before Mary Ellen Manning started with us, and it was so needed, and we need to focus on our personnel processes, hiring, interview questions, exit interviews, staff, personnel matters, FMLA, workers' comp. Everybody was kind of weighing in on it and doing it, and since Mary Ellen has really kind of organized that department, we have protocols, we have systems. We brought the position, or presented the position when we also needed to really develop our professional development. And Mary Ellen will remind me that when I hired her, I said, we've got to professionalize professional development. She did that. And that responsibility now lives in the director of curriculum instruction and assessment. So that responsibility has shifted to Corey, as well as some of the other roles. So when I first presented the position, the board was kind of saying, we're not really sure that this really should be in the administrator's bargaining unit. And I said, hang in there with me. Let me develop this. Let's get these things off the ground. Let's put this in place in this district. And we have, but it's a role that needs to continue. The proposed salary compensation is slightly less than what's currently there, because we've budgeted, well, it's actually quite a bit less, but the budgeted amount doesn't have a benefits associated with it, because it's a half-time non-union position. And while it's not a new position, my proposal in making the director at MTA go from a half-time position, which Mary Ellen has done, half-time HR, or half-time director of organizational development, and half-time at MTA. And there has really been an expansion of programming, and even without the expansion of programming, it's a program that needs to have a full-time director associated with it. But we really have expanded the types of services that we're offering to students at MTA, including the bridges, which I talked to you briefly about, in terms of helping students in myriad ways to be ready for community college and post-high school, as well as some summer camp and summer programming. And those are our, you can get out of that. Those are the proposed positions for next year. Missy, you had a question.
I do.
And my administrators are also here to answer questions as well.
So it's just a follow-up to the Google Doc that we had. So, and this is my first time looking through the budget like this, so I might be reading it wrong, so if I am, please tell me. So under salaried non-certified, where it's all like listed like that, so for Brewster, there's an increase of 67%, which is why I asked. So there's an increase for Brewster, Lyman, and Memorial, And that's why I asked why there was an increase in administrative assistant. And you said the response that you gave me I didn't understand, because I think you said it was at the 10-month position, and I don't think that this is, or is it?
Is it,
Which page?
Or we
you
could
on?
talk about it later.
Um,
It's 4 of 19.
is that when the shift to 10 months?
So effective this year, there are 3 10-month secretaries in the Lyman, Brewster, and Strong
Yeah.
that were one time .50 FTEs at Brewster and Lyman, are now 1.0, and Strong did not have a .5 office, so that was a total of a 1. So we see an increase of a 2.0 FTE in the secretarial non-certified line. Some of those coming from the TA, they were .5 TA, .5 secretary.
And
So this is from 1920 to 2021, and that's where you would see it?
So in 1920 is when it happened. So if we're talking you're talking the 14 positions?
No, I'm talking, it says non-certified admin assistant Lyman. This year, 57,000 and a bit. Next year, 88,000 and a bit. So it's a 55% increase. I just don't understand where or why.
So it went from a .5 to a 1.0, and I'll have to look at the numbers a little closer
And
to
it's
explain
from this year
that.
to next year. That's,
So when you had asked the question earlier, you were talking about the 18-19 year, which was 12
no,
to 14.
I wasn't. I was talking about now to
I have to look at it. I can't
Okay.
answer it on the
No,
spot.
that's fine.
And when we've been talking about this 10-month, the design was that, kind of that second person who was in everybody's office was an administrative assistant as well as a teaching assistant. And that's just the way it was designed, that they were supposed to be in the office half-time
Right.
and in the
Yeah.
classroom half-time. And the reality of that
Right.
was that over time.
No, and I understand that because you answered that for me like 2 weeks
Oh,
ago.
right,
But this
yeah.
is from this year to next year, which is why I was confused. We could talk about it
We'll-
later.
Okay, we'll take a look at
That's
it.
fine.
We'll take a look at that.
And then when they moved
Are there
on, so
any
it's like
other
FTE
questions with
neutral,
staffing
and then
and,
associations of the
you know, we'll continue to have these conversations, use the budget worksheet as well.
I think that, you know, we had talked for a long time about gifted and talented enrichment. We've gone through student achievement on it and have supported that. I think, Lucy, you said, yeah, yesterday you made a recommendation that the student achievement support that position.
Right. We had a motion to support it, to recommend to the board to support the enrichment position.
We had quite a bit of discussion on that issue and what the role would be, so I
previous
think that's
meetings.
important to know.
I had a couple questions. The .5 HR FTE position, do you feel like a .5 is enough for like 300 plus employees? I just get worried like down the road, like 2 years from now, we could say, you know what, it really should be a full-time position, but maybe not because of unions and having union representation, that kind of does kind of overlap with HR, so I was just kind of curious.
I can't think of the right way to answer that.
Okay, that's fair. Okay. And is that position an exempt or non-exempt position? Because the only reason I ask that is because if it's part-time and it's not exempt, then like, you know, we could find ourselves 6 months from now like, oh, you know what, instead of, let's say they were budgeted 20 hours a week or 21 hours, then, you know, maybe we're like down the road, it's like, oh, we're really actually hitting 25, 30 hours a week, so now we are kind of over budget on that position. That's why I ask, but if it's exempt, then it's a moot point.
And it's a great question, and I think really the answer that I was trying not to give was, it depends. It would be great to have a full-time position, and we made a hard budget cut last year going into this year. And I think the fact that I've had somebody who is highly skilled, highly professional, doing 2 very different jobs in 2 very different locations, it's been extraordinarily challenging. We haven't dropped the ball anywhere. Moving into next year, the Director of Organizational Development's role has included communication, all of our focus on equity, the oversight of well-being, all of those things have been kind of, maybe not necessarily what you would see as part of an HR position. Those things, those responsibilities for us to continue with them as priorities are gonna need to be overseen in another manner. So we really, when I look at the HR specialist, I have to try to really shrink it so that it is very, very
And then
directed.
spread the rest of the duties. Okay. And then with the BCBA, I mean, I'm in full support of the whole BCBA, an alternative ed teacher. I think it's great, just from a special ed perspective. I think, like, as a parent and an advocate, you always want to keep children with their peers and, like, in their, like, natural learning environment. So I think the district has always been known to have a fantastic special ed programming. I know a lot of people, we're very few schools have, like, their own ABA program, and so I think this just takes it to, like, the next step, which is great. But I was just curious with the BCBA, I was like, oh, it looks like the BCBA and the alternative ed teacher have similar salaries. I thought the BCBA salary was actually a little low. And I think it's a really important position. And, like, do we really feel confident in that salary number? Or should we, like, I would almost say, like, bump it up a little bit? I don't know. There she is. I was like, where is she?
When I was making the proposal, I did research on state averages for BCBA salaries, and that's where I'm at.
And are they 10-month employees or 12-month employees?
It will be 12 months.
Okay.
And if I may, I can answer that non-certified staff question that you had, Christine. Looking through my couple pages here, because I can't memorize it all. The transition from the 10-month secretary from the TA did happen in the 1920 year. However, when we were formulating the budget earlier in the year, it was not included in there. So that's why you're seeing a big increase. But the actual transition happened in 1920, just never made it into the budget.
For their alternative education program so the expectation is that some of these kids will come back in district. Are there additional personnel that are needed for behavioral disturbances? How will that impact the rest of the high school environment? Because right now, on the face of it, it looks like we have 2 additions, but I would then worry about, well, where's the additional, like, surrounding support staff
Sure.
that would accompany that?
Do you want to address that? I mean, I can, but if you want to talk about just the existing staff that would be in district. So if we had 2 students who were coming back who needed that type of support, does it exist still?
Does it exist? Well, that's, in creating the program, those are the supports we're looking for. So we're looking for the special ed teacher, the BCBA, to help us with behavioral intervention, and certainly have full support from Brian and Beth at the high school level and their staff.
But we have
and
existing
staff.
speech and language.
We have
school
all of the wraparound
psychologists.
services, absolutely.
I guess what I'm asking is, will they pull resources from those existing areas and potentially, and in addition to that, are there potential scenarios where there are increased behavioral disturbances and you need, you're pulling in staff from that standpoint? I just think that you can add 2, but there's a complexity to this, and it can pull resources from other areas, and I'm just wondering how we're going to support that process.
It's a very dynamic and complex situation. And again, that's why we're getting, in developing the program, we're getting the base services that we need. We will not have students in the program without the supports that we have and the resources that we have or that we can provide in all of those areas.
So there's
Brian is here too.
Oh, right.
people have caseloads. So for instance, the school psychologist or the social worker or the OT, PT, speech and language, have a caseload of students. So if the students in that program needed that type of service, we can be in the position you're talking about of kind of having this increased need for staffing. That can happen at Brewster with a pre-K student that is in district. So that, I think it's something that we would be monitoring really carefully if we, in the development of this design, we felt that our existing pupil personnel staff, which are those people that within their caseload, within the time in their day, they could support this program.
You're also, the 8 students that are outplaced now, you're talking about bringing in 1 or 2, and you could bring in the 2 that you have that you can capably serve, right?
Yes.
Where if you
Correct.
couldn't serve some of the other kids that are out there, you could not pull them
Yes,
in.
anybody coming into the program it would be based on assessment.
So you
Absolutely.
would know what they would be.
Needs assessment, yeah, cognitive, behavioral,
And
social,
correct
emotional.
me if I'm wrong, but this would be my assumption. But I think that's why the BCBA is so critical, like, to this role, because a BCBA will develop, like, a behavioral intervention plan. I forget, like, the acronym for, but, like, and that person, like, then being able to, like, train, like, some of the current staff
Absolutely.
that's really why I think that position is actually probably really the most valuable.
Functional behavioral
Thank you.
assessment, and then behavioral intervention plan.
I forgot my dictionary of acronyms.
Yeah.
BCBA,
Board Certified Behavioral Analysts. And, we're talking about a known population. Some students are really, have a tough road, or they have life circumstances that happen, and having that adds another continuum of support for kind of more extreme behaviors that might even allow us to have kind of time-bound, or you maybe have some time in the alternative ed program, maybe you're being supported by some of that really specialized transition, job coaching, maybe counseling component, and then the rest of your day is in the regular high school. The other thing we've talked about is just for some of our students at Strong, that this really could be a multi-graded support system for students with extreme needs.
I was just going to say, with what we put into the budget, with our current resources, with our online program that we have for credit accumulation, and also knowing that the program is going to be very flexible. Students will be here, they'll be out at job placements, they'll be all in different places and working with them. Our resources won't be spread too thin, so.
Thank you.
This is just another area that I, rather than kind of doing this as a line item, I just really wanted to just have a high-level overview of the professional development that's been planned and targeted for next year. In some cases, very specifically, and other with some more general funding without knowing precisely how that professional development is going to look. But our projected professional development for next year, 89,000, and purchase services, which has to do with people who essentially will come in, who have an area of expertise to support our work. So you can see what we have lined up for mathematics, library media center, reading and literacy, unified arts, equity training and support, which I put global compliance network, which should not be under equity because that's about bloodborne pathogens. I guess.
Could be it.
I was creative. Our district design model, as we've been talking about, it's not just about moving to, the single academic approach. It's really about how we're really enhancing what's happening across the district, and that we're having less variability in terms of what's happening for student experience, really kind of rising up of our practices with our project-based learning, the portrait of the citizen work, which is where we have $37,000. That was it. Our enrichment and tag programming, and our continuation of our hot school resident artists, our social emotional learning and well-being. We continue to have funds dedicated for that. Instructional improvement and curriculum work, data, student information systems and assessment with Power School, iReady training, advanced placement and student-directed learning, AP training for American history and computer science, some support for our faculty who work with CUSP, students who are doing CUSP projects. And then, continued focus on instructional technology and STEAM. Special education, there's professional development funds for the department in general and specifically at MTA for professional development. And just kind of our big program focuses district-wide for next year is that social emotional learning and support. We're continuing that work with Second Step and communities at the elementary and middle school level, although we might start calling Memorial Elementary, so it would just be elementary, with also parent support and workshop series for parents. We've talked quite a bit about the middle school and our support there with restorative practices, our continued collaboration with CCSU and their internal family systems department, and with the self-leadership model, also looking in both schools at advisory, and just some very recent survey data that even our entire team has not, do I have a typo?
No.
Oh. I'm just joking. Some really recent survey data that we got where our middle school and high school students were surveyed, and this is information we got from our own climate survey as well as a survey from Durham Middlefield Youth and Family Services, where we're seeing a lower percentage than we'd like of our students at those age levels identifying that they have a trusted adult in our school. So we feel that that's an important focus for us at the middle and high school level in terms of social emotional learning going into next year. We're calling this the pre-K to MTA, which is that focus on how we're moving in our project, our portrait of the citizen work, as well as the expansion of our hot practices, which is the development of our school-based design teams, our hot expansion, and then that project-based learning. And then our pretty big area is the STEAM, our expansion in STEAM. And or SEAM.
What would we be without technology?
It's there, you just can't see it.
That's great.
We need to make that more brilliant.
For those of you that aren't colorblind like me, now you know what my life is like.
So just based on some of the conversation last night that we had at the Finance Committee, where a parent was talking about being really, really impressed with what's been happening in our district in all of those areas and curious about what was coming next. And so I said to Corey and Brenda Parnest, can you just give me a few bullets of like what's going on? So the next 6 slides are the few bullets they gave me. And the other thing I said to them was, you know what, tell me what, like, dream. If we had the resources to direct to this, what would you, what are you dreaming of? So I got the document from
You're gonna hide
Brenda
that from us,
that
right?
said, that was called something like Cat's Steam Dream. So we'll go through just for you to see. I won't read it to you, but you've got to feel really, really impressed with, the fact that we have a base that we didn't, we just didn't have a base like this 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, we kind of started building some traction, and then over the course of the past couple years, under Corey's direction and her collaboration with Brenda and the rest of our departments, you can forward that, have made significant strides. I'll share this with the board so you can go over it, more thoroughly. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, it is late.
That whole set of slides on STEAM is just one aspect of the way the administration and the staff has been moving the district forward. That, coupled with the hot innovation, project-based learning, portrait of the citizen, when we start combining all that together, that's the fundamental foundation that we want to grow off of. And that's where the whole discussion we had earlier tonight that took up the first half of the meeting, that's why it is so critical that we get the classrooms, the teachers, the buildings, all aligned to continue to support that and help that to grow. That said it more eloquently than I did earlier.
Well done. And, when we meet, every week, we have our central office team meeting, and then once a month, we have our full administrative team meeting. And, when we have our central office team meeting, we're all, it's Mary Ellen, it's me, it's Corey, it's Jen, it's Kim, and we're bringing things to the table from different places. And our last meeting, we were like, well, I have a link to that, and I have a link, and this is where it crisscrosses, and this is where it intersects, and that, you talk about the fruition of the work of several years really coming together for the benefit of children in District 13.
Yeah, and I have said many times, we only get 1 year, one chance each year with each student to get it right.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so critical. And when you're trying to get all of those different programs on those slides and get them disseminated to the staff and curriculum and get them to motivate and to work with it and to be able to do it, to have them in separate buildings does not make sense. I mean, that's really the crux of it. For them to collaborate, to take it even to the next level, they need to be working together.
Well, I agree with you that we maximize what can happen for students.
Yeah.
And anyway, and the last.
We're in agreement.
This isn't a school-based program. It's not district funding that would run a before and after care program. And I think that I'd like to wait probably another couple weeks before we really go into a comprehensive discussion about this. This was our projection based on an $8 an hour fee for parents for before and after care. We did a survey, and we got survey results from 145 people. And of those people, 75 are from Brewster, 47 from Lyman, and 28 from Memorial, saying that they would be interested in before and after care. The write-in responses, lots of questions. What if I wanted Mondays on some weeks and Tuesday, Thursdays on other weeks? And would you have a price cut if there were multiple students? What exactly will the program look like? Who'll be running it? Will someone help my child with my homework? And thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a great idea. Thank you. Dolphin Days is full. Middlefield Child Care Center is full. My child can't go there. I'd love for my child to go to a before and after school program in districts. So those are some of the write-in responses with primarily the number of students. You can see first and second grade, 68 students, third and fourth, 58, K, 18, and grade 5, 15. And you can see the distribution of what we've gotten so far. So that's where we are right now. The initial feedback and some questions that we need to compile and send back out to the people who responded, as well as continuing our conversations with Dolphin Days to see, you know, we've been approached by some people who've said, like, why don't you just let them run the program? Use our space and let them run the program. I don't know if that's what their intent was when they said we'd like to partner with you, and whether that would be a benefit to the district or not. So we will continue to look at that, and because it really is, it won't be a budget impact. If we did run the program, there's a potential for revenue. So we're still working through that, and I don't think it's something that necessarily needs to be determined by I think we should make some decisions during the budget process, but we do have some time. Okay, Ann.
The other two topics to be discussed this evening is my turn. I'm going to be going over benefits, and the other thing would be purchase services. So under benefits, in this object code, the certain things that live there are course reimbursement, which is a contractual obligation for our teachers union, health insurance across the district, FICA, which is the payroll tax and Medicare, contractual, actually by law, not even contractual, the district's pension contribution, and unemployment contribution. We are a pay-as-you-go employer with the state of Connecticut, so we don't get that little rate and pay in every quarter. We pay when we have someone collect, so we do need to budget for that. And then also in this account is the funding for the health savings accounts that go hand in hand with the health insurance, and also our workers' comp insurance. It has a significant increase this year, $405,000, or 7.27%. And the reason for that is we had such a significant decrease last year with the change of carriers. We realized literally $1 million savings. With that negotiation, that transfer, we negotiated a rate cap of 9.5% for this year. The way our losses are running is that we're actually at an 84% loss ratio, at probably going to be 90 once the new data comes in. So we are looking at a 9.5. Had we not negotiated that cap, we would have been much higher. The data's still a little early for this carrier, so we're happy that we negotiated the 9.5 because we could have been up in the double digits, higher in the 20s. Some towns are even in the 20s. So we budgeted at, while I said the 9.5 negotiated rate, we budgeted at 7.5. And here's the reason. We've left some surplus in benefits in the past. And I'm comfortable enough that with that history and knowledge of that a 7.5 increase is enough. The amount of the 2% isn't necessarily something that's earth-shattering. So if we, most likely we're going to be at the 9.5, but this account can absorb that if we do go to the 9.5. We have a workers' comp insurance rate increase of $9,000 this year. Again, you'll know that's based on claims and experience. So we have some injuries, and that makes your insurance go up. District pension contribution was increased this year, and that was just because our actuaries ran the numbers for an adjusted interest rate of return. Lowered it a little bit with the trend. So then the lower your rate is on your interest, the little bit higher you have to put in for your district contribution. That was $54,000. Not in total, but an increase of $54,000. And then the bottom line I have here, in the middle, includes HSA funding. long-term disability, life insurance, an employee assistance plan, and contractual course reimbursements, which I discussed a little bit earlier. We've offset this. We had a larger increase, but this is offset by decreases in these three areas. We, in the past, had budgeted health insurance conversions, we call them. So that would be something if an employee has, gets married or has a child and goes from a single plan to a family plan, well, sure, that costs the district more. And we sometimes don't see that coming. Over my 3 budget seasons here, cycles, we haven't used that money. So I was comfortable removing that out. We're at the same enrollment level that we were a year ago in terms of our number of people participating. I think we have a difference of 1 person. And, you know, it's fluid. We do the best we can. We project what we can. We do try to back off similar to the strategy we used with the salaries, not budgeting it 100% because we've experienced some surpluses. Unemployment comp, like I said, we're a pay-as-you-go employer. We have budgeted it a little bit higher amount the past few years and not used it. So we budgeted $15,000 less, so I budgeted at $35,000 this year. And the thought for that was because in the staffing projections, there's some reductions in positions. So if those staff members don't find positions somewhere else or fill, you know, what may become vacant positions in our district, they could potentially collect, and then we would have to pay. And last year, with the budget, the state budget so up in the air, there was a lot of talk about districts having to pay for TRB or towns having to pay for teachers' retirement. And the board included the TRB payment in the budget as a sort of to work with the towns. And so that was $114,000. Clearly that did not happen, but that was in the budget last year. So that just sort of brings the number down. My next slide is on purchase services. Let me just get my papers. Purchase services covers the areas of instructional services, professional development, in-service, professional services, administrative services, and buildings and ground services. So it's a large number, but it captures pretty much a lot of what happens in the district. So we're actually looking at a decrease of $75,000 for this year, or negative 4.62. I'll go over the increases. Actually, I have the decreases first because it is a decrease. So I'll tell you what decreased. Outside evaluations. So Dr. Serino and Mrs. Keene talked about the BCBA, and that we're able to, if we were to hire a BCBA as an employee, we would be able to not contract those services. Those contracted services did fall under this line here in purchase services. The salary for BCBA would not be in this line item, it'd be in salaries. We had an updated enrollment study done this year, 1920. So that was in our budget for $8,500. We don't need it next year. So that's just a decrease. And then the big one, culvert engineering fees. We had $165,000 in culvert engineering fees for 1920, and we don't need them for 2021. Any work that's being done on the culvert is all going to be rolled into the bonding amount going forward. Now the increases in this area is there's a new CIAC rule that requires a state supervisor at all home games. So that increases our purchase services for athletics. This also covers, this line item also covers officials, referees, game workers, ticket takers, all that's in this line item as well. With the moves, the 3rd and 6th grade, there was a number put in here of $5,000 for professional movers to assist with those moves. There's quite a few moves, and we got a quote, which was actually lower than we had anticipated, of $5,000. A big one that's been important to me over the past year, as well as to the IT department, is the cybersecurity training. We can't talk enough about this. Our auditors, regularly talk to me about, you got to train your employees, you got to train your employees. You need 2-factor authentication. You need to change your password rotation. And we've received phishing emails asking to change people's direct deposits, asking to wire funds somewhere, using our district forms and looking like they're legitimate. Had we not contacted the individual, which is our policy, we could have been we could have been a victim. So that's so important. And part of what we're trying to roll out is to teach the employee not to click, when not to click. So if you get an email that says there's a donut truck outside, check the menu, probably don't click it or look out the window. And it can track the people. Believe me, I used that example, I didn't think of that myself, because when I went to an IT seminar with Ken, a cybersecurity seminar, the very people who work in the federal government, Homeland Security, got that email that there was a donut truck, and when, most of them clicked on it to see the menu.
Oh.
So I didn't make that up. I thought that was, so even they get calls. We can track, might be something we discussed, but we can get the results of those, who clicked and who didn't, and provide further training should we need to. The next item, and also this professional development, we would have some more professional development for our IT staff in the cybersecurity area. So that piece I just discussed was really for employee training, and then there's another piece in there to train our our existing IT staff on cybersecurity. You have to keep up to date on it. It's something new constantly. Which was the next one I said, professional development for cybersecurity prevention. We had an increase in specialized speech and services for this year. That's a contracted service as well. That was increased by $30,000 this year. We had an increase in our occupational therapists and physical therapist wages. We have never given them an increase, and we want to retain our current providers, looking at the going rate. We increased what we felt was an appropriate amount, totaling $5,000 for both of them, not each, both. An increase in in-service for wellness and equity training of $8,500. And then an increase in contractual commitments. We're looking at things like, have we ever had our weight room inspected? I don't think so. How about an auditorium stage? How about the catwalk? How about the lights? Asbestos consultation. There's things that the district really needs to address and to get on a cycle. So we've put some money in there for, that's $20,000 that we've put in there for doing those kind of inspections. And we had our turf maintenance. Our turf is no longer under warranty. We're hopefully doing really well saving. That will be discussed on the Capitol night. And because the warranty is expired, the impact testing is no longer covered. So that's a $5,000 expense that we've had to pick up this year, next year, until we get the turf replaced. Just want to see if there's anything else I wanted to hit on here. Another thing in this is security services. So with our door alarms, with our increased cameras, with our cell phone boosters, all that comes support. So that's all included in there too. And that was $15,000. Yep, $15,000. I discussed everything else. And then I just wanted to mention part of the decrease here, which I had said earlier, is the bringing the BCBA as an employee. Estimated a savings of $100,000 by bringing that person in as an employee. Clearly, like I said, that's offset by salary in a different area, so it's not a total savings of $100,000 or cost avoidance, but it is a savings in the long run, the net. And that's all I have. Do you have any questions?
How do you keep track of all of this?
Thank you. It's, well, I have very good help. Tiffy's amazing help. And then I have like a little Bible. And the administrators are great, and the last minute emails. And so, yeah, it's a team effort for sure.
We're very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, this presentation will be on tomorrow because I'm not doing it tonight. On the same place that you could find it last time, Central Office Board of Ed. All right.
Any other questions for Kath? The administrators are welcome to leave.
And just acknowledge that their work
Thanks for putting all this effort into this budget. I know it's not just one person that does this.
Pardon?
It's,
No,
it's,
that's fine.
all of you looking at your own budgets and, you know, having done budgets for a long time, it's a really complicated issue to get everything that you want and give up most of the things that you really want. So, but thank you very much for all your work.
Great job, guys, thank you.
Again, the questions and answers are still on Google Docs, so if you have any more questions about the details, we can still pursue that. Maura, did you have to leave? You all set?
Yeah.
The next item on the agenda is committee reports. Policy committee, Norm?
Last week we talked about, or last time we met rather, 3 policies regarding confidentiality and access to education records, Section 504 and ADA, and sex discrimination and sexual harassment. You've had a couple of weeks to look at them. The committee, more than half of the people here have already approved them. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve the 3 policies that I just mentioned as presented by the policy committee.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
OB?
Okay, so our meeting had Officer Hesseltine joined us, and we met. Most of our meeting was focused on what Dr. Serino had discussed with us, the newest updates from the state about lockdowns, drills. I'm not sure if you want to add anything, just that it's very detailed, and I noted too that our format, Dr. Serino had mentioned that they actually suggest for much more extreme practices other than what we do. We try to focus the practices as centered around helping and making sure that less anxiety is involved with that. We also talked about our school climate survey and found the areas of focus were homework, a lot of anxiety based on the homework, and as Dr. Serena had mentioned also in her presentation, having a trusted adult at home and at school. And Kath had also shared that our current advisory model is also for that purpose, for them to find or have a trusted adult in the school. And we had our updates from the playground committee, and our survey of the 8th graders was originally on our agenda, but we've postponed those for our future meetings coming up in March.
One question on the lockdown is, when looking through like all of our board education documents and our policy documents, I didn't see anything explicit about kind of school safety / lockdown, like with definitional aspects of, you know, what constitutes a lockdown versus this. I think there's, and hopefully this is probably what was discussed in that, is there's been some confusion around, you know, language that's used within it, and then I think the activation of it, and maybe not necessarily with the response. It sounds like the response has been wonderful. It's just been like when and when not. And I didn't know if that is a board level like policy decision, or if that sits in some other document that's within the schools, or.
It actually sits in the safety and security manuals, which we just, as I mentioned in that meeting, have all new protocols from the state, and really that is a huge undertaking for us this summer, is to get that rewritten, but it isn't in the board policy, and happy to share with, I mean, I can literally forward to you what we got from the state in terms of the template and the protocol, and we've talked a lot more about just our own internal, what makes sense, because we really
when we first started, all of us as school districts, following the whatever protocols, whoever happened to be, are directing what we were doing, we just did exactly what they told us to do. And I think that we are starting to exercise our own judgment in, you never said it was a drill when it was a drill. You did a lockdown as if it was something real was going on. What we know is it's important for everybody, just like in a fire drill, just to kind of practice. But kids need to know it's a drill. And then after it's done, they need to know that was a drill. We just had unannounced drills that had been planned for this week. And I put in a few other steps to please tell teachers beforehand that the unannounced drill was going to be happening during the week, to pay special attention to students, anyone who seemed frightened or anxious, to make sure that they were sharing that with the administrator, to immediately send a parent square notification out to all parents. So just kind of, when the state police came and did a presentation for us this fall, what they really stressed was kind of the importance of a practice, so that in the event of an emergency situation, you almost have some muscle memory for it. So our thoughts are, if you're in a heightened anxiety state in a practice, you're probably not learning it to the degree that we would want you to. So that was a longer answer than you probably wanted. The minutes, I think, are gonna be very comprehensive, because we talk
there was a
quite
lot,
a
yeah.
bit
I was just
during
trying to
well-being.
sum
Yeah,
it
no,
up,
that's great,
but-
I just.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
So
a long
definitely take a look
conversation.
at that.
And we were actually in the lockdown with Kath and.
Oh, right. We were locked down with the first
selectmen of both towns on,
They stood up to leave, and I was like, you're not going anywhere. And then they were loud in the lockdown. No.
and we were locked in.
But we had coffee.
And we were locked
And you're
into the room.
surprised, why?
And we were supposed to call Matt Ritter, and I was emailing him saying, we can't do a conference call with you. We're in a lockdown.
But they did indicate that it's a drill, and they did give a performance evaluation afterwards over the speaker, so indicate that Scott did a really good job saying, we did excellent, and everybody did what they're supposed to do and check each room, so.
And were the selectmen okay, or did they get frightened?
They were okay, they just wanted to leave. It had already been 2 hours, so. Okay, thank you. Utilization, Andrew?
Okay, so we met on February 20th. We talked about the regional plan, which we've done here quite for some time tonight. There was some discussion around corn. I think the main point of information coming out of that, it was the selectmen from Durham were tentatively settling kind of on a end of March date for making some decision with regards to that. I also saw that was a part of the finance committee, some further discussion, so I'll leave that for the finance. And then there was some discussion around kind of playground equipment at Memorial and Lyman, and there's a lot of effort is going into kind of identifying what might be the best strategy moving forward in the next year. I think that's about it.
Lucy, on student achievement?
Achievement Committee, I'd like to make it shorter, but was just so much information in there, and I'm going to summarize it, but it was just yesterday we met. The first thing was, we were presented with the grades 6 through 8 newly developed math curriculum, and it's just phenomenal. It's developed in-house. There's extensive unit documents. I just want to show you this particular paper, which you do not have. You do have some papers within your packet. This is 8 pages for one unit. If you look on this sheet here, there's actually 29 units, and each one of these units has a packet like this that goes with it. And it's just amazing how extensive it is. It's not only essential questions, it's materials for the students, and I can't go over because it's just like all kinds of testing and all. And, what was I gonna say? The thing that's interesting about this one is that there's a grade 7 accelerated, there's grade 7 accelerated unit, and there's also going to be a grade 8 accelerated unit that is now being developed with the high school. So that's a new addition, and they found through research that this is the age level where they can start putting in that type of accelerated learning. So, I mean, it's just phenomenal. Also, the committee voted, actually, we need a motion we voted to recommend to the board that you approve this current grade 6 math curriculum as presented. So before we move on, we'll just make the vote.
Yeah,
6 through 8.
6 through 8.
6 through 8.
I move that the board approve the 6 through 8 math curriculum presented to the committee yesterday. By the way, it's on the documents are already on our server.
Right.
So you can look at the documents that Lucy was talking about.
And I'll second that motion.
Any comments? All in favor?
I'll abstain.
The second thing we discussed was accountability, and you do have some papers in your packet. It's interesting to note that this particular sheet details the points, how the district was graded by points. There are 12 indicators that the state looks at in order to come up with the scoring. It's not only just academic achievement and growth, it's participation rate, it's absenteeism, it's post-secondary and career readiness coursework as well as exams, it's graduation rates, it's physical fitness, arts, so there's a lot that goes into the scoring. And it was interesting because we had some scores that, just kind of historically, in 2016-17, the district scored 79.3%. In 17-18, it was 81.5%. And the most recent one, 2018-19, was 83.6%. So you see that our scores are going up, so we're going in the right direction. We also saw a comparison of the DIRG. And in 2016-17, we were 9 out of 30 district schools. In 2018-19, we went up to 6 out of 30. So we're seeing changes there as well. The schools were also given categories. There's 5 different categories. Obviously, the first is your school of distinction, and then you have your middle performance for second and lower performance, and then your turnaround schools. And if you look in your packet, you have your celebrations here, which are really worth looking at. This is also online, I believe it is an email. It goes through each of the different schools. Lyman was still a school of distinction. Strong School increased from a category level 2, from a 3 to a 2. Memorial continues at a category level 2. There's high participation rates within our district. The state looks for, I believe it's 95% participation in this whole process. The school district is actually at 99.3%, so pretty much everybody's in there. And there's other types of celebrations in here as well. Also attached to that is the needs for improvement, the areas that the district is looking to focus on for improvement. And if you happen to look at the part where it shows the performance index gap, that's how your high needs, thank you. Your non-high needs students compare to the scoring with your high needs students, and the state has a specific difference. And you could see where 15, I believe, is is like a deviation. 15 is the number the state uses. You can see where Brewster and the high school are with regards to language arts, math, and science. And so that just shows the importance of Kathy with the staffing in order to address that gap as well. There were just a couple of other areas that you need to know as well. Brewster dropped from a highest performing category to category 3, and the reason for that this year were the principal transitions, as well as the third grade had 3 teachers that were out on maternity leave and had substitutes for extended periods. And because of that, it affected the scores. The high school dropped from a category 2 to a 3, and this is the first year that they were measuring the science standards, which brought some rates down, and the participation rate at the high school was only 93.3, and that caused them to lose points as well. Okay. The last thing we talked about was the HOT expansion, and Kathy reviewed how the HOT school model is being implemented in each of the schools now, what's being added to each school, and what's being proposed. She also explained how the portrait of a citizen and the HOT approach come together and are integrated. The district's move towards project-based learning also fits right into the student skills determined in the portrait of a citizen. And lastly, because District 13 is one of the few school districts not only implementing the HOT approach, but expanding it to all the schools, grants are being made available to assist with organizing the approach throughout the district. And I believe part of this, Bob talked about the community conversation in March. Some of this will be discussed at that time, as well as the regional plan. Okay?
Was there a second motion that we wanted to bring?
Yes, we did already. It was for the enrichment teacher. We did it earlier when Bob brought it up. Yes, thank you. I wrote it down so I didn't forget. Thank you.
Any questions for Lucy? It was quite an extensive meeting. So lots of-
Yes, it was, and I tried to put it
Yes.
succinctly together for the important pieces.
The Finance Committee met last night, and basically went over the budget on a pretty high level, had a number of questions. I think Jim and probably summarized some of the most significant questions last night. Jim Irish did. And went over to basically had questions and answers on a lot of the budget issues, probably at a higher level. We also talked about the regionalization plan, and I think, it was basically similar to the discussion about, how to move forward. Most of the Finance Committee, I guess all the Finance Committee, were concerned with the implementation and the cost of keeping another school open. So that was really focused on the financial part more than anything else. And we talked about corn, and the only other issue on corn was that the town has hired a person to do code analysis. And we sent them the full plans and specifications of Corn School. So they were working off all the detailed construction plans and in order to see if there's any variances in code that they could adjust for the school. So those are the main issues last night. Anything else? In terms of communications, I've had Kim Davis and Jenna Hadacone. We're concerned with before and after school, and we're supportive. And Laura Perbeck, is that how you say it?
Yep.
Was planning to move into Middlefield and just wanted to know about the school structure. So I told her it was interesting. Huh?
I got that email, I laughed like that.
Did you give her the answer, all of the above?
I gave her all the answers, and I told her
And
there's,
it turns out she was one of my students in the middle school.
that's great.
And was one of my daughter's friends, and oh my gosh, it was really, and the only reason I knew is because Bob showed me his phone and said, do you think this is an okay response to this mom? I was like,
because I said more to follow on this.
more to follow, capital event up with you.
So we also received a letter from Russ Smith, he's the senior pastor of Meriden Hills Baptist Church and principal of the Mid-State Christian Academy, who, understanding that Lyman may be available, was interested in discussing the possibility of talking about that in the future. So there's some interest
He doesn't
in.
want corn?
I don't know.
Corn's available.
Germs is no.
That's a K-12 school?
I don't have no idea what that school is.
I think it's a K-12.
But it is a school, so. And the other thing we got is a letter from New England Association of Schools and Colleges. How do you say it, NESAC? Is that how you say it? NEASC. They are setting up a meeting with Brian to go over accreditation, and they had some minor issues on library media. So those were my communications. Anybody else?
Is that, they didn't like the old tape recorder and?
You know what, it has to do with having a part-time rather than a full-time library and media center person.
He had said that at one of the student achievement meetings that he thought that could be.
Yeah, so they're coming out to meet with him next week.
I'll give another shout out to the play, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. These kids are awesome. And fun fact, I choreographed the Stampede. So,
Whoa.
come see it, please. I did. I did.
That
You
is-
do. It's organized chaos.
You should have a T-shirt that should say, "I choreographed the Stampede."
But they worked so hard.
That
It's
is
amazing
awesome.
that
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah.
1st through 8th grade, and it's a
They
good
do a great job.
compilation of
Yes.
both programs coming together, and we have some very talented kids. So, please come.
It's always wonderful.
Let me see if I can see it. I love
We
it.
had, we were serenaded by Mamma Mia last night while we were in the finance committee. The keyboard, Tim Fisher was in there, and whoever is the kid who's playing. And I
Tyler
mean, the
Fusco.
entire finance committee was Mamma Mia in the background. It was like one of the best finance committees we've ever had.
It's so funny that, I drive all day, and there's like 5 high schools doing Mamma Mia this year.
Did you see it
ridiculous.
on 91, the big billboard
No, I
from
didn't.
Maloney High School? There's a massive billboard on 91.
No, but Mercy and Xavier are doing it, Cromwell High is doing it, Maloney's doing it, and then there was one other one that I saw. It's like the show of the year, apparently.
Huh.
Well, it's very popular, so, yeah.
Great job.
That's odd,
It's-
though. It's
Yeah,
They
just
must
that
have lowered
many
their
though.
licensing fee.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah, I hope
I
if
hope
you
this
could-
is
if you really
okay
like
to
it, you can
say,
see it 100 times.
appropriate, but I just wanted to give my thanks to the Brewster community, to supporting my daughter during, my daughter was in a wheelchair for like a number of weeks, and I can't tell you, I think this is what truly makes our district so special, is how like every single person in that school really helped, like, my daughter through a very difficult time. And I was even touched to hear how, like, even Mr. Edwards, the PE teacher, was like modifying games for her. And I think that's just really something special, and that should really be acknowledged, and that the board should really know how special everybody was. It was a very difficult time, but we're very grateful.
Thank you.
Nice.
All right, if there's no more, superintendent's report?
How about if I mail it to you and just tell you that we're part of the Southington Health District, and I'm gonna go to a meeting next week on the coronavirus,
Oh, good.
Don't bring it back,
March
please.
3rd at 3 PM.
Good. Are they passing it out?
They're passing out coronas.
Yeah. You know, one of the things when we joined the Southington Health District is that they said that, that they would avail all of their services to the full
Yeah.
Regional School District 13,
We
even
have
though
been
only
kept up
Middlefield.
constantly.
Yeah, and they do have when we assessed joining that health district as a town, they have a lot of different outreach information and that kind of stuff. So I think it's very important. In fact, I think when we looked at the vaccination rates for like Lyman School, which is very low, that perhaps they could provide some information to the parents and stuff like that. And, again, it's an emotional issue, so maybe facts won't impact it, but I doesn't hurt. So, no, so I'm glad to hear that they're
Sure.
getting more involved with the school district.
How about the director of finance?
Oh, one more communications. I did receive a letter from Sunny, who was the teacher that came with the folks from China, and they indicated that in Ningbo, they had 200 cases of the virus, and their school has been shut down since January. And they are doing it all online, and they expect the school to start open up at the end of March.
End of March,
Yeah.
3 months, wow.
So, but they're doing all online education with their students. So,
All the schools and like factories and stuff, they all have to receive like almost like a DPH like sort of certification to like reopen like over there. So it's like really strict, like the government's like coming in and making sure that like all the kids will like be safe and stuff.
and they said that they have to go out with a mask when they go out, and they have to, and they basically are not eating in restaurants. It's all handled by takeout. So,
I think we want to take.
so,
I thought that was cute.
and that's, that's a city of 6 million people. That's not Durham, So anyway, I just thought, since you brought that up, I
Yeah.
figured that, that we are still in touch with the school, and you're anxiously waiting for us to come back.
And Brian and I are beginning to talk about how we really enhance a virtual connection, because letting this go until their students come back in the fall, that wasn't the intent of our partnership in the first place, so we really do need to continue to address it differently.
All right, sorry, Kim?
All right, very briefly, I'm reporting on the January financials because we didn't do it at the last meeting. We are 62% received year-to-date for our revenue and 56% expended year-to-date. We are running under budget in snow removal. Hope I don't jinx us. We're over last year, so we could see a surplus there. We've got the end of the winter cleanup and some stuff like that, but we could see a significant, well, when I say significant, maybe about a $20,000 surplus in snow removal. So that's good news. I am going to be, I'm reconciling a lot of the accounts to report at one of the future meetings, if not next meeting, as to where we may stand with a surplus at the end of the year, now that we have 6 months in. We are looking that we're close, a little bit of surplus in salaries, and maybe a little bit over expended in outplaced tuitions. So more to come on that. I want to do a little bit more work on that and report it at the next meeting. MTA revenues at 63%, expenditures at 48%, and we typically do around May a transfer for the health insurance. So the district pays for the health insurance, but then transfers it in about May. So we're running a little bit behind our revenue, but we'll make that up. And we should see a surplus in MTA again this year. Can't really, a little too early to judge how much, but we will be at least seeing a surplus as well.
All right, thank you. In terms of new business, we have a vote to approve the Cognizant Model UN field trip request. Norm, you want to handle that?
Sure. I just might have some language for that. Well, anyway, I looked over the form, and I'm sure you all did too, and it looks pretty straightforward. So I move that we approve the Model UN field trip to Cornell University on April 23rd through April 26th, I assume 2020, with the understanding that this trip may be withdrawn at any time due to actions of Homeland Security or other government or law enforcement agency or health agencies such as, but not limited to, Center for Disease Control, and that parents, guardians, and students be apprised of this possible action.
Second?
Any comment? That's good language.
That's good.
Yeah,
I've had a lot of practice.
Can I note that it's CHRS, but it really is
Yes, I noticed that
CRHS? Just, for formality reasons, but that's
Yeah.
right.
Oh, well then,
Let's all
We
start
can go
over
ahead.
again.
you know, we,
And I'd add.
I do that all the
just-
time, just so you know.
Motion please corrected.
A lot of people do that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next is the, vote to approve the Regional High School DECA field trip request.
Oh, the one to Nashville. I will move approval of the CRHS. Thank you. Field trip to the International Career Development Conference in Nashville, Tennessee on April 28th through May 3rd, 2020, with the understanding that this trip may be withdrawn at any time due to actions of Homeland Security or other government or law enforcement agency or health agencies such as but not limited to Center for Disease Control, and that parents, guardians, and students be apprised of this possible action.
A second?
All in favor? The last thing is, through Misty's support, we have another person who is willing to work on the building committee, Kelly Angworth? Angworth. Kelly is, I'll just read it to you, it's easier. Has spent 18 years as a healthcare administrative professional with a focus on large-scale project management. She has spent the last 6 years as Associate Director of Clinical Space Planning for Yale Medicine. In this role, she is responsible for the planning, oversight, and delivery of large-scale projects affecting the clinical enterprise. Kelly represents Yale Medicine physician staff and leadership to ensure consistency in care delivery, workflow, and patient experience from day-to-day. Kelly is the point person for Yale architects, planners, construction managers, and senior leadership. Changes in scope, etc. She recently included the management and planning for renovation of the new consolidated clinical site for the Yale Child Study Center. The 77,000 square foot space was designed intentionally to support children and families in a behavioral health environment. In December, she relocated 500 medicine administration staff to 2 newly renovated spaces in New Haven. Did that include you, Andrew? No. And so anyway, she's a very capable person with lots of skills that we'll bring to our building committee. She's a Durham resident. She is married with 3 children. She has a 4th and 1st grader in Lyman and an upcoming kindergartner. So with your approval, I can appoint her to the building committee.
Move approval.
Second?
Any comments? Missy, no comment?
I think she's awesome.
Yeah, she's awesome.
I think she'll be a good asset,
Yeah.
for sure.
We had a drop-off
Thanks
of
for
the
the
committee
recruiting effort.
from one of the contractors who was on the committee, so we need to replace him. All in favor? Aye.
I promised her it wouldn't be too many meetings. That's the only way she agreed.
Yeah, I did too.
On utilization?
No, building.
Oh,
committee.
building. Oh.
So you
At
both
least
lied?
Not yet. We have no
Stop
money.
on the
Yeah.
We have no money
For the
yet.
record.
Once the bond passes.
Yeah, I mean,
She'll be good.
as soon as we get working on the water
have
main
public
and
comment.
other stuff, there'll be meetings, but right now, there's very few. Next is public comment. Tanya?
Given the hour, I'm gonna do the 3 minutes still, so there's your warning. Thank you.
I love how you did that.
When you're talking about transparency, that is something that needed to be addressed in as much as when meetings are not open or conveyed to every situation that comes up that impacts the Durham and Middlefield taxpayers. It doesn't go unnoticed. So may I remind you that we're all part of the whole picture. And I understand that it was reported that the turf that is currently on the school grounds that we put in years back was exposed in the newspaper account of last year, that it was one of those that was considered hazardous and should have never been put down. We were cited in the report along with a New Jersey school, I think was a New York school as well as us, and another school somewhere. There were 4 of us that were written up, just in a few sentences. So anyway, I guess we got to mind the turf. Further, when we all have like, I think 2 counselors at the Strong School and 4 at the high school, since they're in the job of human resources in a sense for students, not for personnel, I think that perhaps we might look at, because of the numbers having gone down in the schools, that we take from the counselor positions possibly and put in the BCBA, just switching so we don't have repeat performances, so to speak. And what bothered me was a neighbor telling me that their daughter employed in the school system, I will not name which school, but she would not have to worry about losing her space in a job security here, should Lyman close. And I guess I gave away too much right there. That she'd be taking in another spot somewhere. I didn't comment to the comment. I just took it in, and as far as that goes, safety of the children is a priority. And the Luann incident is terrible. The coronavirus is all over the world, and hopefully there'll be an end to it soon. But that's another matter. But the vaccinations are taking place now, the discussion of the state, the deliberations, and considering the safety of all that participate in our school programs, whether they're here as students or outside visitors or parents, whatever, coming through. I'd like to think that we would support vaccinations. They have been proven that we didn't get measles like California had the surge again, and we didn't. We don't want to see the lung machines again. Thank you.
Roger?
Good evening, Roger Passavant, Durham. Came before you guys 2 weeks ago in regards to a package of information I had sent out to you guys in regards to a student that I was supporting who had been expelled from the high school. I apologize for my ignorance, but I guess I don't understand why in the communication section this evening that was not brought up. I do believe, or I hope, all of you received the package. I don't know if I did not go through correct or appropriate pathways. I don't know if I'm supposed to email that to you folks. I don't know if the process was not followed. So if the process was not followed correctly, I would like to know. Otherwise, I guess I would also like to know why my communication to all of you was not read into the minutes this evening. And I guess I would like an answer. And from an arrogant standpoint, I apologize for interrupting. I'm very disappointed that nobody on this panel reached out to me. I made it very clear in the letter that I would like to discuss it further. Left my cell phone number. I am a business owner in the community, and I'm very disappointed.
We get back, it's a personnel issue or a student issue, we can get back to you personally if you want to talk, but not at the meeting.
So I'm sorry, so someone will get back to me personally?
You can talk to me, but not.
I can help with that. I also chaired that meeting, so I'll reach out to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you all very much.
Any other comment? Carl?
Try to keep it under the 3 minutes. Regionalization. Regional means regional to me, not town by town, which it seems to me like we're regressing to. First sentence in the beginning of the agreement. A desire for a comprehensive educational program within the limits of reasonable expenditures prompted the voters to form this agreement. To maximize resources and maximize for the students. And on that same page, number 3, under recommendations. Under recommendations, the key word, elementary schools and middle schools shall remain in the present locations. It's a recommendation. There's been no amendment to this agreement, which the attorney was very adamant about, things need to be amended to make changes. You go one to the last page, next to the last page, under referendum. It must be emphasized again that within the board limits of the above approval proposal, which is presented by law, the Regional Board of Education would determine the programs and facilities of the regional district. Logically, the board would be expected to give due consideration to the recommendations of the study committee, but is not legally bound by those recommendations. So I'm at a loss of why the attorney is saying that we have to have a school in Middlefield. I understand Middlefield's concern, but I still don't understand it. I can't wrap my head around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
We'll try to get counseling for you.
Maybe I do need some.
Any other comment? If not, I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.